All right, we're live. Hey, everybody. Hey, Simon, how you doing, man?
Good, Jason. I'm doing very well, thank you. How you doing?
Awesome. Yeah, all good for a Friday morning here.
Yeah,
in Melbourne, Australia.
exactly.
So if you don't know, Simon and myself are both live in the same city here at the bottom end of Australia, and so I hope everyone on the other side of the date line's having a great Thursday evening. So, look, I'm really stoked to have Simon here today. So, obviously, we're going to cover the 12 tones video that we did with the Alta 100, right? And we'll kind of get very much a deep dive on that in terms of, the setup as recorded. And you can see Simon's in his studio there, right? So it's where we did the video and the tracking. Really kind of deep diving on the amp settings and also the inspiration behind choosing each of those tracks. I want to talk about kind of where all that stuff came from. But if you don't know Simon, well, you do now, right? And I'm going to ask Simon to introduce himself, but he is one of the most, in my view, respected and gifted players I've ever had the pleasure to meet. And he's a really nice dude as well. So it really helps. So Simon, I think that some of the guys might have heard of you because you kind of broke the internet, well, the Van Halen internet in 2019 when the VH1 tribute show that you performed at the Melbourne Guitar Show was posted, and I think that video is nearly 300,000 views now, right? Which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'd never expected that. It was something that I posted because when we did the Melbourne Guitar Show back in 2019, it was really just something that was put together bespoke for that show. And I had no idea at the time that they were going to live stream it on Facebook, and therefore had like multiple video cameras, but also, were multi-track recording it. And as luck would have it, really, the universe sort of intervened and made it so that the live stream, something had gone wrong with the audio, and it was only in one speaker. So it was, and because they were obviously camera editing on the fly, some of the camera edits were a bit weird too. So of course I got in touch with them and I said, look, we can't really leave that up because and especially because we were doing the authentic thing, because it was the Van Halen 1 record where the dry guitar was panned kind of in one speaker and the reverb was panned in the other.
Were they broadcasting the reverb?
So they were basically broadcasting just the reverb from the guitar. So I contacted them and said, I'm sorry, guys, you can't leave this up. But if you still have the multi-track audio and the camera files, just put it all on a drive and give it to me, and I'll fix it up, and then I'll give you the finished video, and we can put it on our respective socials. So that's really how that came about. And that was never a plan to video that thing. It was, we were doing it for the 40th anniversary of the Van Halen 1 record. And I thought, well, what better way to pay tribute to that amazing album than to play it in track order, and where every instrument, the drums, the bass, and the guitar, were as much as possible note for note from the record. And so it ticked away slowly for a little bit, but then I don't know, it hit some YouTube algorithm or whatever, and it started going bananas. So yeah, it's done very well, but that was never the intent. It was just really a record of the day that I thought I was putting up. So yeah, some people might have seen that too.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, like if you just Google, 2019 Melbourne Guitar Show, Van Halen, Simon Hosford, whatever, you'll find it. It's on Simon's channel, right? Which I'll put a link in the.
It is, yeah. It's on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, just check it out. Just, you go to Simon's channel, you'll find it. You've even had some fairly well-known professional players reach out to you on the back of that video too, right?
That's true. That is true.
Up to you whether you want to name them or not. But.
Oh no, we can talk about that. It's been really humbling because some of the guitarists that when I was younger that I, looked up to and bought all their albums, people like, Nuno Betancourt and stuff, have since reached out to me and, just as a friendly hello and, what were you using on the day? How did you pull those tones? That kind of thing. So that's been really wonderful, actually, and very much a surprise. So, yeah, I'm glad I put that video up now. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's cool, man. It's cool. So just to fill in, maybe just been a few minutes, just filling in for the viewers a bit more about your background, your career, and kind of
sure.
what you've been up to. Be cool.
Yeah, well, my career kind of really kicked off when I started doing sort of, I guess you'd call it like jazz metal prog fusion stuff with Virgil Donati, the drummer. We had a band called On the Verge and did a whole bunch of gigs around Australia, not much overseas. And then did an album called Serious Young Insects, which did pretty well at the time. And a lot of the people that, certainly who I look up to, like drummers like, Thomas Hark from Meshuggah and people like that, still in interviews quote that record as something that they listened to a lot back in the day. And so, I started working with Virgil a lot, doing this crazy fusion stuff.
Yeah.
And there's actually a full 1.5 hour concert of us doing that on my YouTube channel too. So if anyone wants to sort of check
a great
out what
clip.
I'm talking about.
That's a really good clip.
That was fun. That was thrown into the lion's den for that one because that was a reunion show that was put together especially for the Australian Ultimate Drummers Weekend that would happen annually. And, they would have, all sorts of headline drummers that are super famous, whether it's Vinnie Colaiuta, Mike Portnoy, whoever, you can imagine, Dave Weckl. And Virgil Donati hadn't headlined for a while. And so they asked him back to headline and said, look, can you do a full 90-minute show of On the Verge? So we put it together as a reunion. We only had 2 days rehearsal. And then we did a warm-up gig in Sydney and a warm-up gig in Adelaide. And then that one in Melbourne that you'll see on my YouTube channel. So it was it's a lot of notes and odd times to learn in a few days, but
it's insane.
That's the nature of the beast in the music business, isn't it? I mean, Leonard Bernstein is quoted as saying, worthwhile things are only achieved with a goal and not quite enough time. And I think that's really true of most things in life, actually. But so anyway, from there, so I was pretty young when I started working with Virgil. I was 19. And then I started being a regular member of Tommy Emmanuel's band and touring with him. And then also only a year or two later, I became the new guitarist in Men at Work and ended up touring the world with Men at Work for about the next 5 years or so. Mostly South America, but we did the States and Canada and some other places as well. And then beyond that, my career has sort of been a dotted, session guitar type career with different artists in Australia, Vanessa Amorosi, John Stevens, Daryl Braithwaite I'm touring with at the moment. And then, lots of studio work as session guitarists do. So yeah, a bit of a smattering of everything really.
Yeah,
but that's how my career started is mainly with Virgil, Tommy Emmanuel and Men at Work was like my early career.
Yeah. All great Australian exports, aren't they?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. So guys, do check out Simon's channel, right? There's some awesome stuff on there. And that Virgil concert too is it's just, I remember asking you, right, when we did the Alta video, I asked, I don't know if you remember me asking you this question, but I said to you, all that odd meter stuff, because it's all like, I don't know, 11, 16 and God knows what else, right?
Some of it's pretty wacky, that's for sure.
I said, man, do you actually count it, or do you just like feel it and you go, no, you just got to feel it. You can't count.
Well, if you do it enough, of course it becomes like anything. I mean, it's obviously most people will play music in 4/4, but you're not really counting in your mind 1, 2, 3, 4 all the time. You just kind of end up feeling where the one is of each bar. And with the odd time crazy stuff, it becomes like that when you do it enough. You're not really counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because otherwise it becomes impossible to actually play music. But yeah, you end up just sort of feeling it. And, I mean, of course, historically, a lot of Greek music and stuff like that was super odd time. And their traditional music, you just end up feeling it. And actually, with Virgil, we had a Greek bass player, Evripides, and a lot of the stuff he wrote for us was based on traditional Greek rhythms. It was actually as basic as that. It's just that when you add heavy distorted guitars and crazy keyboard parts, it sort of muddies the waters. But the core of what it was traditional odd time, European rhythms and stuff like that.
That's super interesting. Look, I might just get to a few of these, a few of the comments in the chat, guys, and then we'll get into kind of how this whole video kind of.
I see Ben Coons in the chat. How you doing, brother?
Yeah. Hey Ben, we'll put him up here. Hey man, good to see you tuned in. I'm going to go right up the top here. So Terry, hey Terry. Terry is a proud owner. Well, I hope he's a proud owner of an Alta 100. Terry lives in California and took delivery of it probably a week ago, right, Terry? Maybe a week and a half, but pretty recent. Yeah, Mark. Hey, good to see you here, man. We had this question, Simon. We were chatting about this just before we came live on air. So I'm going to throw to you, man, for to answer this one for Sonny.
Okay, so the best reliable and budget, I guess that's the key word, 50 watt. I mean, there are plenty of great 50 watt all tube amps. I mean, yeah, I would say, and I was saying this to Jason, it really depends on, like, to me, there's kind of a big divide in what kind of style of amp. If you want it to be a high gain monster, more Marshall-y kind of thing, or, Mesa Boogie or whatever, then that's probably trickier for me to answer. Although I do believe the 5150 Iconic is pretty good and very reasonably priced. So if that's more what you're talking about, if you're more talking about something that will do nice cleans and all of that, and isn't so much of a Marshall-y thing, I mean, you couldn't go past a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe. And I've owned and used one of those for all sorts of gigs and sessions and toured it for, 25 years probably, and had the same amp. So if you want to know about reliable, it's only had a major service once in 25 years. And I don't know what the retail price is on those currently, but it's very reasonable for an amp that good. And it's the amp that's used by backline companies all around the world. Like if you ask for a valve combo, that's what you'll get. It's 40 watts, not 50, but you're splitting hairs at that point probably, and it comes with a 112. So, I couldn't recommend that more highly, especially if you're looking for an amp that you're going to run primarily clean and run pedals in the front of, then perfect, And
this is the kind of thing when you're touring and you have to travel reasonably light and you got backline higher. So you're gonna set up normally a kind of clean backline and run pedals in the front. Yeah, so that's the kind of amp that you'd end up with.
Yeah, 100%. Using backline and touring is it's way. I've just found over the years with trial and error. I used to hire backline amps where I could kind of dial in it's clean where it was sort of on the edge of breakup. So it depended, if I went to the bridge pickup and started spanking it really hard, it would go all spongy and juicy and lovely. The only problem with that is if you happen to get a backline amp that isn't in good shape and hasn't been looked at for a while, and you're relying on that as one of your core kind of, middle of the road sounds, then the whole gig is for lunch. It's all over. Yeah. So I found, these days what I do is I'll order backline amps like the Fender Deluxe, and then have all the pedals I need on my touring board so that I can make it go a little bit spongy and gritty if I want, or I can use it super clean, or I can run a big high gain distortion pedal and get a searing lead. So, so look, I mean, in terms of a relatively well-priced valve amp that's like 40 watts with a 112, I couldn't recommend that more highly. And if it's something you're thinking of, doing gigs interstate or wherever, you can get one in any city in the world super easy. They're everywhere. So that otherwise, I don't know. I haven't played the 5150 Iconic, but I believe it sounds great, and the price is good. So if you're looking more for that kind of thing, that's probably the way to go, right?
Hard to go wrong.
Yep.
We'll just go through a few more of these comments. We'll try and get through to the end, and then we'll get into the video, guys.
Sure.
So Brad's in Texas, also the owner of an Alta 100. So Brad, you've probably had yours for a month, give or take, 3 or 4 weeks, something like that.
Nice.
So man, I hope you will
nice.
stay up late. Stay up late tonight and hang with us, man. That'd be awesome. Hey man. Ben, we've already said hello to Ben. How you doing? David, hey man, good to see you here. Richard. Scott Kingman. How you doing, Scotty? Haven't heard from you for a while, man. I hope you're doing great. We should catch up. I will say, so one of the things that Simon and I probably got introduced to each other through Warwick Newman, I'm going to say.
Yep, I think so.
Was is a good mate of Scotty's as well. So Scott, some of you guys who are on our DIY builders group on Facebook, which we've got about 2,000 people in that group now, will know Scott and his work. Because I think, Scott, you probably built yourself 5, maybe 6 amps now over the last 4 years or so.
That's cool.
Was just a good mate of yours too, right? So I kind of that connection with Scott and then through to you, Simon's been awesome. Racer X. So that was your I don't know who the Black Squirrel is. Maybe you do, but that's the I mean,
yeah, obviously that's a handle name for someone that maybe I do know, but no, I don't. I know that's the Black Squirrel doesn't ring a bell, but yeah, Racer X. So apart from my session career stuff that we already touched on, my funnest thing to do is put together these fun little projects that are basically just love projects. They're just for me. I don't do them to make any money out of them. It's really just about having some fun and reconnecting with some of the stuff that really turned me on when I was a teenager. And one of the things, I mean, growing up in the 80s and the early 90s, I mean, I loved like all this different kind of rock and roll and all the obvious things, of course, like Van Halen and this and that. But one of the other things that I really loved, that was a slow burn for me when I first bought the vinyl when I was 14 maybe or something of Racer X, Paul Gilbert's original band. I didn't know if I really loved it. Like, it was a bit, I don't know. Anyway, but what happened was it was a slow burn for me, and I found that after a year or two of just continuously playing it, I really kind of fell in love with the super, super shred high energy of it. And so one day, just for fun, I decided, let's see if I can assemble a bunch of guys and actually play some of this stuff live. So I formed for a short time a Racer X tribute band called Racer Axe, and that's why it says Axe there. But you can see that stuff on my YouTube channel too, actually, if you're curious. But
I saw you guys play. I saw you guys. You're with James Ryan, right?
That's right. So it was myself, and then of course Racer X was always 2 guitarists. So James Ryan is the other guitarist, and man, we used to have some fun because really, even apart from the few handful of gigs that we ever did, it meant that James Ryan and I were catching up like at least once a week, drinking coffee and working out all our harmony shred licks, and we just had a blast doing that. It was really, really fun.
It was because that was the guitar show gig as well that I saw you guys play at.
It was. That was another thing that
2017 or something like that. I'm gonna guess.
Yeah, so that was a couple of years before the Van Halen thing. Yeah. they asked me to put something together, and I just thought, well, I can't think of anything more guitar-y than doing a 2-guitar harmony shred thing. So we put it together for that.
It was insane. It was equally inspiring and depressing as a guitar player watching you guys do that. But anyway,
I find it that way. Yeah, I find it that way. Learning the stuff and trying to figure it all out. It's sort of inspiring, like how great it is, and I mean, really, how proficient Paul Gilbert was at. I mean, he was only 18 or 19 when he was doing that. I had another 20 years to practice that stuff before putting the band together. You know? And of course, he wrote it. He wrote all those songs. So, I mean, we're talking about, I mean, everyone knows Paul is amazing. But really, when you think about that, he was already an instructor at GIT at 18 and doing Racer X in LA. That's just, that's
you do
Mozart
find
level kind of genius.
You do find that those guys, like, and we could come up with a list of players that are like that. They seem to have achieved that level of capability with their playing by 20. By the time they're 20, they can already do it all. And then it's just about.
I think you're right.
Yeah, and from there they kind of mature their, their songwriting skills or whatever. But their actual playing ability is already formed by that age.
Oh, I would say 90% of their musicality and their chops is already there by. Certainly by 20, if not even by 18. I mean, we all know that with Eddie, how young he started. And he really, I mean, he was a fully developed Edward Van Halen by the time he was 20. He was doing all the stuff that he continued to do. But you're right, the songwriting changes a bit and that kind of stuff. But also, I mean, Yngwie Malmsteen, you can go on YouTube and hear bootlegs of him playing with bands in Sweden when he was like 16 and 17, and it sounds identical to, I mean, it's just all there already.
It's not like it was already doing it.
It's just scary. And you're right, it's equal parts inspiring and bloody depressing. It's like, oh man. But
it's probably more inspiring than depressing, but you know what I mean, right? You come away from an experience like that and you just go, okay, that's just a different level.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, man, the video was so much fun to do. So we will get into the deep dive of this. Hey Lyle, man, awesome to see you here, man. And you've got a follow-on comment here. Yeah, you don't hear Bernstein quoted in most guitar videos.
The reason that I know that quote so well is I actually used to have a great picture of him just on fire conducting an orchestra, and that quote like in a frame in the studio, because in the music industry, as everyone in the chat knows, there's just the deadlines you get given to supply, whether it's guitar parts or learn something for a tour, like I was talking about with the On the Verge stuff. It's just never, ever enough time. And Jason, you would know this even with building amps and stuff. There's just always some impending thing. And that's why I love that quote so much, because every time I'd be in the studio stressed out that, oh man, I've only got one day to learn these 20 songs and memorize them, I would just look at that framed thing and go, it's okay. This is what everyone has ever been through, is the same thing.
100%. And I mean, I think it's for some people, it's the only way they can operate, actually. Like, and in terms of needing, like, and I'm a bit like that myself. I need kind of like a goal or a deadline, and then I can work to it. Otherwise, you just kind of like, oh well, I've got plenty of time, I'll do something else.
It's too open-ended otherwise. I mean, for all we know, all the famous, even, symphonies of, 300 years ago, like Beethoven's Fifth, came about because someone gave him not enough time, and that dun 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 was him just thinking, you are a dick, So who knows?
No doubt at all.
Whipped it out in an afternoon and went, well, that's what you're going to get. And, that was genius enough that still could make it work.
Yeah, totally. Gaz, hey, man. Gary's a good friend of mine, Melbourne-based guy, and a really talented amp builder in his own right, actually, I'll guess.
Awesome, Gary.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, man. You didn't need to throw $10 in there, man, but I appreciate it. Helps to play to the StreamYard. The StreamYard account. Terry, yeah, definitely a proud owner. Awesome, man. That's so cool to hear. Jono. Now, Jono's Melbourne-based as well, and I'm going to give Jono a big shout out here because Jono has serial #1 Alta,
Cool.
the very first one that I sold.
That's awesome.
And he came here and picked it up, and we went through the amp, played through one of the cabs just over here, and yeah. So, Jono, man, awesome to see that you've still got it and feature it on your own channel. So Jono's active on YouTube and Instagram if you guys want to go and have a look at his stuff. Really, really tasty player.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so Jono, I worked on Jono's. He's got an Olbrich Stadium 80, and I put in a fixed loop in it for you, didn't I, Jono? About a month or so ago. And Simon, I know you played Olbrich amps. Have you still got them?
Yeah. I mean, Dave used to mod all my amps and just, keep them in good nick, retube them, all that stuff. I don't. He made me one that was a Stadium 80, unbelievable sounding amp, and it was in white Tolex with a see-through perspex screen with like a blue LED behind it. Just the coolest looking head. And I used that for a long time. In fact, the Virgil Donati video on my YouTube channel, you can see it. That's what I was using for that whole concert, actually. Yeah. So I was using that. I was using that sort of clean, and with an old big box Rat pedal in the front of it. Yeah, in case anyone's wondering what the tone of that video is. But no, I don't have it anymore. That was I made an offer that I couldn't refuse from someone, an amazing blues guitarist here in Melbourne called Shannon Bourne. And and Shannon was already knew Dave Ulbrich well and was playing his stuff, but he was around at my place one day and he plugged into it, and I just had to take my ego off the off the shelf, so to speak. And when he said, "Oh man, can I plug into your Ulbrich amp?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And he plugged into it. I never ever heard the amp sound that good. Like, I mean, I thought the amp sounded good with me playing through it, which is obviously why I had it. But when Shannon played into it, I don't, like this symbiosis or something happened between, and I just thought that is how that amp's meant to sound. And I just know because Shannon plays so different to me and is such an amazing, wonderful player. I just thought that amp should be with him because he manages, because of the way his fingers are on the strings, but also his phrasing. It was like, no, this is designed for you more than me, even though Dave built it for me. So we spoke about it. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I was super happy because Shannon still got that amp and plays it, and it's in the right hands. He was doing. He was getting out of it what I felt like I couldn't, and I think it's just different styles, But that, man, when I heard him play that, I was so upset. I was like, "What the hell? How come it has never sounded that good with me?" And he didn't even have any pedals or anything. He was just plugging straight, and I just went, "Dude, please take it." Now I'm depressed now, So so that's where that amp is at.
We've talked about this already, right, between the two of us, which is that, and we both believe the same thing, which is that an amplifier is actually an instrument.
Yeah.
Right? Just like your guitar is, and arguably is, in terms of kind of, the end delivery of your tone and communicating what you're trying to communicate, arguably more important than your guitar. And certainly my view. So that's cool, obviously.
That's my view too, is I think that, I think in terms of like, what were we saying the other day? Given that the player is the same, and someone asked like, what's the most important thing in an electric guitar setup? Like, is it the guitar, the pickups, the woods, the amp, the speakers? For me, by a pretty long way, like if you were building, like a version of the food pyramid.
This is the tone pyramid. Right? The
tone pyramid. That whole bottom block, the base of the whole thing, is the amp, and the electronics in the amp is what I mean by that. Because then I think the speakers is next. Then I think probably the pickups is next. Then I think probably the bridge of the guitar is next. Then the woods, and it goes down and down and down until you get to things like tuning pegs and nuts and things. But I mean, obviously the player makes the most difference, because you put an incredible player even on a kid's beginning guitar and amp, and they'll make it sound good, you know. So that's really the very, very bottom of the pyramid is the player. But then next to that is, for me, 100% the amp.
Yeah, man. I agree. Sweet Cheetah. Love the 12-tone amp video. Awesome, man. Thank you. Curious if there are plans to offer an Alta 50 based on the recent Jim Root model. Yeah.
You don't know what to say, do you?
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two parts, I think. One is that the Alta 100...
Jason, while you're answering that, I'm just going to quickly run to the bathroom, everyone. Sorry.
Yeah, man, that's it. All good. The Alta 100, sorry, I was saying. So I purposely designed it to fit in a Marshall small box head cab, right? So it's the same physical size as a 50-watt Marshall, like a 1987X or a JTM 45 even, the Marshall small box. So, and it has a half power switch on the rear, which lifts the cathodes of two of the EL34s. So I think the amp covers 50-watt, you know, segment, if you like, right? It's kind of the same size as a normal 50-watt amp, only marginally heavier because of the transformers, and can run in genuine 50-watt mode. So, but if you kind of rephrase the question a little bit and said like, well, are there plans for like a stripped down Alta that's lower wattage, you know, even lower than 50? Look, yes, yeah. The question is when, right? There's no immediate plans to kind of put that out there. But if we look into kind of, you know, 2024, and, you know, I guess you think about these things in terms of calendar years, then, yeah, I'd like to be able to do that, for sure. So it would be a kind of like a subset, if you like, of that amp. What Jim wanted, actually, that the build that I did for him, which is shipping out, be picked up on Monday, actually, and it's been sent directly to him. He's going to use it. I think he's going to use it initially in his home studio, but then it's going to go into their rehearsal rack. So he's got two main live rigs. One is mostly based in the States, and the other rig is mostly based in Europe. But they have their whole Slipknot show. They have two complete sets of, like, all the way down to the video screens and everything. And they have like two of these things around the world. They can kind of leapfrog and move between different festivals and so on. So he's got an Alta 100 in each of those A and B rigs. And the smaller one is for their kind of rehearsal rig, which does tour with them, because they have a jam room set up where the guys can kind of go in and basically play at stage volume and kind of warm up and loosen up, I guess, before they get on stage. And so that 50-watt amp will be there. It's a 2-channel amp, and channel 2, the gain channel of that smaller amp is channel 3 of the Alta, hardwired in the modern voicing mode, and channel 1 is just a clean channel, like a blackface style clean, basically. Yeah. So Paul Gilbert won the LA Guitar Wars at age 16. So there you go. That's
right. I think there's video of that on YouTube too, and it's frightening. Like, everyone knows how good he is with his picking hand and how fast he is, but when you see him at 16, I think that's the fastest I've ever heard him. Like, it sounds like it's sped up almost, like it's blistering. It's inspiring / depressing. Yeah, that old one. Yeah.
So this is just a comment here from Lyle, and then we'll move to the I guess to the main part of this discussion, which is the video itself.
Before we do, remind me, I want to ask you about the 50-watt versus 100-watt while you're talking about it. I think that's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll do this first, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So Lyle, look, I'm sure the guys who are watching this probably follow Lyle's channel already. If you don't, check it out. Right, Lyle's channel's awesome, and really building nicely. So I think, Lyle, you've just gone through 40,000 subscribers, which is awesome, man. So congratulations on that. I know
Right.
how much work goes into, building a YouTube channel. So to get to 40,000 is, man, that's a real achievement, dude. Seriously. But yeah, so Lyle's, I think, in violent agreement with us here about the amplifier being an instrument and being obviously critical for a player. So yeah, man, what was your question about the 50 watt?
Yeah, here's a question that this is really just from me to you, and hopefully then interesting for everyone in the chat, is as far as like volume level for an actual gig, I find that the difference in 50 watt to 100 watt doesn't make that much difference. I find a 50 watt is plenty actually for most gigs that I've ever done. So therefore, like, apart from the obvious power difference and then maybe a little bit of volume difference as well, tonally, is there a reason? Like, let's say you equalize the volume of the two things. Like, let's say we were recording in the studio, and so it didn't matter about the volume difference and the power output difference. What would you say is the tonal difference, or do you find that to be minimal also?
Pretty subtle. I actually did. It's funny you asked me this question, because yesterday, before I packed Jim's amp, that 50 watt amp, it's now boxed up and ready for collection by FedEx. But I did one of our, because I know you love this stuff too, right? Recorded a loop.
Yeah.
Recorded some stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Recorded some stuff into a looper. Played it through the 50 watt amp. Set in the gain channel, so that's channel 3 of the Alta 100. Recorded it, then pulled the amp off, put the 100 watt up, dialed it in, matched the volume, set all the settings the same, played the loop through that amp and recorded it, and then went back and forward between the two of them. I couldn't tell the difference. I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you think if you were running your amp more like a plexi, where you're really, really driving the output stage, then you might hear more of a difference?
Yeah, I think it becomes a bit more of a feel thing at that point. There's a feel. I think there's a feel element. I mean,
slightly spongier when you're pushing a 50 watt hard, as opposed to 100 watt.
A little bit more of a sweetness about a 50 compared to 100, and obviously the 100's a bit more immediate, a bit faster under the fingers, kind of thing.
So faster transients, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. It's because I think we would all agree, everyone listening to this stream would know that when you crank a tube amp up like that, there's a tonal element to it, of course, but as a player, there's a feel thing as well. How does it feel to play? Does it feel difficult, spongy, nice, sweet, ugly? All kinds of descriptions, right? That go along with how does it sound? So I think my experience, and I haven't actually played. I haven't put the 50 and the 100 watt Alta back to back like that, but I have done it with my half power switch on the 100, and that's definitely that. You just kind of feel like it's a little bit more forgiving, just a little bit in the 50.
Right. Okay.
Not that the 100's unforgiving, because I kind of I wanted to voice that amp to be so it's a pleasure to play it, not that you're wrestling with it,
I've got a layman's question then about the half power switch. Does that, I mean, obviously you're taking two power tubes out of the circuit. Is that essentially make it exactly the same as if it was a bespoke 50 watt design output stage, or is it slightly different because of the way the switch works?
It's still slightly different because of the way the power supply and filtering is set up. So normally, and I say normally because anyone can change this, right? When you design something, you could configure it however you like. But in a 100 watt amp, the filtering, and so when I say filtering, so if anyone can picture an old Marshall in their heads, and they got the blue can caps sitting on top of the chassis, everyone can visualize that, I'm sure. Those are the filter caps, right? So in a modern amplifier, you don't really see those because people have kind of moved to, putting those in inside the chassis and out of kind of eyesight, if you like. And they're using, more kind of modern, more efficient capacitors that are much smaller in size, but still do the same job. But when I say filtering, that's what I mean, right? And the filtering is all about taking the AC power that comes from your wall and converting it into nice, steady DC that your amplifier can then actually use to amplify your guitar signal. And the way that you set that filtering up will change the feel of the amp.
Right.
Yeah. And that coupled with the voltages and kind of how you set the voltages up across, obviously the voltages that the power tubes see, but also through the preamp and the gain stages in the preamp. So they're all factors with the tonality and feel. So in a 50 watt, in a stock 50 watt amp, if you, again, I'll just use Marshall as comparisons. If you look at a 1987 model 50 watt 4-hole plexi compared to a 1959 Super Lead 100 watt plexi, the filtering is different. So if you get your 100 watt Marshall plexi and just literally pull 2 tubes out, which I see heaps, right? Like heaps of amps that come in here for me to work on have had 2 tubes pulled out. Old Marshalls, I mean. It's running in 50 watt mode now. And you can match the speaker input. What people may not realize, and getting me down a rabbit hole now, if you take a 100 watt amp and you pull 2 tubes out, you should actually move your impedance selector down 1.
I never knew that. There you go.
Yeah. So
because I've done that before with some of my amps, but I didn't know about that.
If you it's because you want to match this is going to be a long conversation about reflected impedance here, but effectively what you want to do is, when the importance of selecting the impedance on your amp, whether you've got an impedance, like on my Alta, you've got a 16 ohm jack, 2 for an 8 and 2 for 4, or on a Marshall or whatever, you might have a selector 16, 8, 4. The reason that's important is because you want to match the load that your power tubes see is matched to the cabinet. So 16 ohm cabinet, you set that impedance selector to 16 so that your power tubes see that and they're comfortable with that load. If you pull 2 power tubes out, you've now basically moved the load out by 1. So it's the same as like if you still had 4 tubes in your 100 watt amp and you plugged into a different impedance jack, or you set the selector 1 away, you're now mismatched. It's the same. Yep. So cut a long story short, if you put it in 50 watt mode, you should actually, with your 16 ohm cab, you should have the amp set to 8.
Gotcha.
And now they're matched again.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you can run them. You can run them 1 away, and it's not the end of the world, right? But you'll hear it. It'll sound different. They do sound different, right? Yeah. So, in fact, I worked on an amp just this week that our mate Warwick Newman had worked on.
Yes.
And it was set in 50 watt. It had 2 EL34s in it, and was, God bless him, on a sticker on the back had said,
right,
he had instructions, and it said, 16 ohm cab, use the 8 ohm
output. Yeah, gotcha.
So he knows.
That makes sense. Thank you, brother, for answering that. And sorry, everyone in the chat, if that was stuff that you already. But I don't know. I find this stuff endlessly fascinating, and as much as I've played tube amps for since forever, really, but there's still like these little nuances that you wonder about, and when I think of asking it, I will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the next time we hook up the amp in your studio, which I know we'll do again at some point, we can play with that. Play with the difference between 100 and 50.
I would love to do that. Why not? Let's go down all the rabbit holes. Why not?
We could do a video on that, along with the other list of videos that we've come up with.
There's quite a list already that we've thought of. So,
let's talk about the idea for this. So back to the kind of, well, not even back to, let's start talking about the 12 tones video, which came out great, right? I mean, I couldn't have been more happy with how that came out. So, man, thank you so much for doing that with me. How did it, because my memory of this is that this was your idea. You said to me, hey, man, we should do this.
Well, you know, I had played, the only time I'd actually played, you know, in person with the alto was, of course, at the Melbourne Guitar Show, where I caught up with you on the stand and had a blast through it, and it sounded incredible. But of course, I'd seen all your videos on your YouTube channel as well, like during its development and the sounds and things. And it was just very clear to me that the what's the right word? Not the topography, but like your kind of design brief for this. I mean, it's clearly very flexible, and with all the different modes and, you know, the bright cap switches and vintage mode and all of this, I thought, wow, this is not only great sounding, but super, super flexible. So I think I said to you, you know, what would be really fun is let's just see what happens if we just throw all these different styles at it, and with different guitars, different pickups, you know, and, you know, it's 3 channels. So that's a starting point. But then, of course, you've got your mode switches, which you can kind of even tailor the variation more than that. And so I think the idea came from that. But I also thought, you know, look, this will be fun for me because I get to play like a smattering of all the different styles that I've grown up playing. So whether it's, you know, something heavy like Meshuggah, or whether it's classic Van Halen, or whether it's some clean, sparkly stuff. Like, I mean, and there's nothing more clean and sparkly than Alan Holdsworth's clean tone, you know. So, so as some of these ideas formed and I was sort of spitballing them at you, you were like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. And then, but then the list just grew and grew. And to be honest, the list now, and I should share this with you in my Apple Notes, the list now for a part 2 of like some other tones we could pull with different styles of guitarists again is, I mean, it's at least already 30 more. So, so I think, I mean, I think we can consider that 12 tones video a part 1. And of course, over the duration of this chat, if anyone in the comments wants to put like what they would particularly love to hear the Alto 100 do, we will do it. No problem. You know, if there's something that you're like, yeah, but can it do this? Or yeah, I'd really love to hear it doing that. Put it in the comments, and we'll, you know, I'll go through the comments later and make a note of what you're saying, and we'll do it, because man, it was a fun day for me. And that was the first time, as you know, that I really got to sit with the amp for a long period of time and try out all these different tones. And it was really important to both of us to do this not using any pedals in the front. You know, we really wanted to try and pull all this vast range of tones just using the head itself. Because if that's the starting point, then the sky's your limit once you add pedals into that. I mean, it's, you know, so I think that's the genesis of it, really.
Yeah, it was cool. I remember you, we were chatting, you know, in the, I guess, a month or so at this point before we actually cut the video, and you started really reeling off a few ideas of tracks that, you know, you could play as part of the video. And I was like, I started to get pretty excited about it, because you, like, the stuff that you were kind of contemplating tackling was some of my favorite tones, you know, and I wasn't sure that, I mean, I knew you could play them, but I wasn't sure whether the amp could deliver the tone, you know? So there was this kind of a little bit of like, not anxiety at all, but like excitement more about like, I wonder if we can actually get that, you know, get something close to that. So we should let's talk about the signal chain, because I think one of the things that you guys probably noticed, right, in the video, is we were using the Boss Waza tube amp expander, and I think we made, well, I don't know if it's a discovery, right? There's probably other folks that have discovered this, but for ourselves, because I've got one as well, right? One of those devices. Through a pretty exhaustive morning of kind of going through and A-Bing direct, right? And by direct, I mean, so we had Simon's old Marshall 4x12 set up in his kind of isolation room at the studio. It's got old greenbacks in it, right?
It does.
And
yep.
we had a 57 on that, and that 57 is coming straight back into where you're sitting there, right? And basically through a mic pre and then into Pro Tools.
Yeah, through a basic mic pre with no EQ or anything like that. It's just going through a relatively cost-effective Focusrite sort of thing that's sort of a jack of all trades preamp. I've got some other preamps that are more coloring, and that, you know, if I was recording it for somebody's record, I'd probably run it through that. But for the purpose of capturing the sound of the amp and trying to color it as least as possible, and that was the reason that we both decided, look, let's not multi-mic the box, because of course, to get a really great sort of three-dimensional and a smooth tone, you would, you know, any engineer or producer would normally use more than one mic, you know, so they might use a 57, you know, right in the center of the speaker. And then they might use, you know, a ribbon mic, like a 1-2-1 kind of somewhere for a bit of a warmer tone and blend them. And then they might even use a condenser mic, like somewhere just back a bit in the room. So you kind of get some early reflections and you get a bit of air and breath into it. I think what was important for both Jason and myself is we wanted to make it as much as possible like that anyone that has even like the most basic home recording setup, so whether that's just like some recording software on their laptop and one SM57, which is, you know what, they're $150 or something, those mics, that they can capture the same tone. You know, I think that the repeatability of the exercise was super important. And so that's why we did it that way. But as Jason was alluding to, the first thing we did, and we took up a lot of time on that day before even hitting, like, you know, different guitars and going through the modes of the amp. We spent a good half that time just going, okay, the first thing we need to do is let's find where the 57. Now, I've recorded guitars my whole life in my home studio and other people's big studios. So Jason and I know pretty much where your default position for sticking a 57 on a greenback speaker is going to be. But just because we wanted to be super thorough, we said, all right, let's keep walking back out into the room and listening to what it just sounds like standing in front of the box. You know? And we didn't have the amp at blistering volume, so it was blowing our ears out. You know, we just had a reasonable listening volume. And so we would go back and forward, and we would come back in and listen to it on my studio monitors with, like I said, no EQ, nothing in the way, just the mic, basic preamp, straight to Pro Tools. And we took turns. So like Jason would be playing and I'd go out and listen and go, the mic needs to move like half an inch to the left. And then I would play and Jason would go out and back. And so we probably spent 30 minutes just getting the mic position right. And until as much as possible. Now, obviously that tiny diaphragm on a 57 is never going to sound like 4 speakers in a room. It's just never going to. But we felt like that the overall tone and EQ curve was as close as possible without any other things in the way. So that was the first thing that we did. So we spent a good half hour just on that. And then, I don't know, why don't you talk about like the next thing that we did?
With the Waza?
Well, yeah, because then we decided, okay, we're going to run it through the Waza tube amp expander. And the first thing we wanted to do is just set the 2 reactive load switches. So not using any of the IRs, right? That's the important thing to remember. We just wanted to go, if we're running through it and essentially using it as a master volume then, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to know, where do you set the reactive loads so it's not coloring the sound, but it's also not impacting, like what Jason was talking about earlier about sometimes the way an amp feels. So we're listening to the tonal character and the EQ, but we're also listening, sort of paying attention to how it feels to play it on the guitar. And we wanted to set the reactive load switches, the resonance and the presence, so that we felt that it was accurate. So that was the second stage. So we probably spent a good half hour on that as well.
I'm going to share. Now, this was a bit of a discovery for me, right? Because anyone who's got one of these Waza, the Boss Waza TAE, or has even read any of the forums about it, there's a lot of discussion about the reactive load in this thing and where do you set the switches and blah, blah, blah. And, can they damage your amp and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah,
we just trusted our ears and recorded.
Yeah, we didn't. That's right. We didn't reference the manual for the thing at all. We thought, because really, it's all about what your ears are hearing. I couldn't care less what the recommended settings are. It's if it doesn't sound the same as when I'm standing in front of the 4x12, then who cares?
We got the thing down to so let me see if I can bring this up, guys. I got the photo of
yep.
That's your unit, right? With the amp sitting on top of it.
Yeah.
And through recording, so we recorded the 57 direct to Pro Tools, right? And then recorded the amp, of course, we recorded the amp directly to the cab through the 57 into Pro Tools, and then we recorded the amp via this box, which then powered the 4x12 and then 57 into Pro Tools. And these are the settings.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and just using our ears, you can see we've got the resonance in the low position.
Yeah.
The
lowest
presence
setting for the resonance.
Yeah, the very lowest, right? The presence is up 2 clicks. And that...
Yeah, it's at the second highest. Yeah.
Yeah, the second highest. That's it. One back from the top. And the where the speaker out, you can see the master volume there, right? Speaker out. That marker there is unity. That's the other interesting thing about this unity volume or unity gain. We want to use that term. There is more headroom left in this power amp on the Boss. So if you can move it, we're probably on 9.5 there or something, I guess.
Yeah,
maybe
I would
9.
say I've got it sitting in front of, let's call it 9.
Yeah,
I would
9.
say it's about 9 is unity, so that whether you're using the TAE or going direct from the head to the cab, the volume is identical. And we thought that was, why not figure it while we're at it? Let's just figure that out too, so that we know where to set the knob, so that, because the one thing that's impossible to do is detect slight nuance difference in the tone when your volume levels keep jumping back and forward when you're plugging something in and then unplugging it. If the volume levels are up and down, you can just forget, your ears will never tell the tonal difference. So so it was important to us. So we spent a good 10-15 minutes just getting the unity. But as Jason's saying, what that means is the tube amp expander will actually go a little more than what your head is delivering volume wise if you needed it to. It's 1 notch more. Yeah.
And look, guys, you don't need a Boss tube amp expander to run the alta, right? You use the master volume and you can turn it right down to TV volume if you want. It's just that we wanted to, in terms of reproducing these tones, we wanted the amp running, I guess, at the same volume that the original amps that we used to record would have been, which would have been cranking, right? So this allowed us just to wash a bit of volume off.
Yeah. I mean, the other consideration was, because we knew it was going to be a pretty long day to capture all these 12 tones. My studio is just in my house, and the room that the 4x12 is in is not soundproofed, so it's all brick. There's some, not that much gets out, but if we're cranking for 8 hours straight at rock tube head volume levels, man, my neighbors will obviously have killed me. So, especially with the amount of farting around and just, sound checking chords and trying different guitars. So really, I think part of the original reason to run through it is because if we needed to, and if we needed to go late into the evening, we could accurately capture the sound of the altar and even do it completely silently if we had to, you know. So
Exactly.
I mean, that was a consideration with, in case anyone's wondering, yeah, well, why use it at all then? If you're matching the tone and you're matching its volume output, just plug straight from the head to the cab. I think the thing for us was, you know, we needed to know that for that length of recording in somebody's like a house studio, that if we needed to, we could keep recording without the volume. And so it was a very interesting exercise. But I mean, to our ears, it got to the point where on the desk, I had 2 different channels up with the same recording, and we were flipping back and forward, and neither of us could tell the difference. We started losing track of which one was which.
You couldn't tell, right? So those settings there were a real kind of eye-opener for me, because, as I said, I've got one of these devices. I've never known kind of exactly how to set this thing up to be completely transparent for the kind of, I guess, Marshall-inspired tones that I like. And so this was awesome. And the other piece, you can see that the EQ light is on. And so I do have a screen grab of that. This was the last adjustment. So if you really want to get to the finer detail, we had just +1 at 63 hertz and -1 at 250. And that was the kind of the icing on the cake, if you like. That was like, at that point, it was like, I cannot tell these apart.
Yes, that was that tiny, tiny little adjustment in just 2 of those frequency bands. Then for both of us, we were like, okay, well, I'm forgetting which one is which, you know?
Yeah. And just finally, guys, not that we use this. Simon mentioned, though, that, you know, we had the option, I guess, of going completely silent if we wanted to. This is a discovery that Simon had made that we tested, and that is this Boss thing, right, has got built-in cabs. And I mean, of course, the first thing that I did when I got mine was loaded a third-party IR into it, which I didn't even bother looking at the stock cabs. But this setting here, and again, we did an A/B test on this, and it's probably not identical, but man, it was close. And it was
closer than all the other cabs that were sort of bespoke IRs, you know, like Old Marshall with greenbacks, or you know, Mesa Boogie with 75 watts, or whatever they were. Everything just didn't sound even close to my Marshall with greenbacks. Not even the IR that was Marshall with greenbacks. It was miles away. So I'll let you continue.
Yeah, no, so exactly right. So just again, we just thought, to throw this up here, right? Because if anyone's got one of these, this is another really great tip, right? That we've discovered, you know, by actually trying it in the studio. So the front of house 4x12 with the 57 short distance 3 centimeters away. That is the closest thing on board the box that we could get to the actual 57 itself. So
that's right. And like Jason was saying, you know, we spent, so all up with the things that we've just mentioned, that was probably the better part of 3 hours, right, before we even got to tracking the tunes. And because it was really important to us that we knew we were capturing the altar as pure as sound as possible. So it's really, you know, I mean, you can't be talking about the sound of an amp when there's even a possibility that your recording process or your signal chain is going to slightly change the sound of that amp, as if you were sitting right in front of it or it was on stage. You know, that was just paramount to both of us. And certainly for me, out of respect for how much hard work Jason's done and how amazing this thing is, it felt, because it was in my home studio, I felt really like it was my responsibility to make sure that we spent those 3 hours just making sure I was capturing it, so that when we bypassed everything and it was just the 57 on my box and the head, it was the same sound, and neither of us could tell it apart. So that's what we did. Yeah. And actually, just quickly before you move on from the tube amp expand, you mentioned before, there's been plenty of talk on forums about how, you know, if you run your Marshalls super, super hard into these things, that they can actually blow up your head. I have found, I think, why people are talking about that, why that even became a thing. And what I noticed one day is when I was playing chords through it, and I changed one of the reactive load filters, or the resonance or the presence, while that, and I mean, I was using my Plexi dimed as well, right? So
while you were playing it.
While I'm playing a chord and the audio is running through it, I changed the reactive load, which I guess that would be relays, right, Jason? Those switches?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that split second gap when you're changing your reactive, because I was trying to figure out what the best reactive load setting was, it popped the fuse. It didn't blow up my transformers or anything, but it did pop the fuse in my amp. And I thought, that's strange. So I tried it again. I replaced the fuse and I thought, I wonder if that's what it is. Hit a chord, change the reactive load, and the fuse popped. So I think all it is as simple as that if you're going to change the reactive load settings in it, you don't do it with a dimed amp with signal going through it. You know, you change the setting and then you play. I actually think that's all it is, because the unit itself is great.
I think that's a really interesting discovery, and you're probably right.
Yeah,
I've read all that stuff too, right? And I'm aware that, you know, a couple of people, I think some dude who owned a Wizard blew his output transformer or something like that. I'm not sure, but yeah, you're probably right. It's probably not. It's probably something in the design that's not ideal. You don't want that, obviously, to go effectively open circuit for a split second.
Second even. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Who knows, right? But you did it twice and had the same result. And if you're blowing,
and I didn't have any more fuses, or I would have kept seeing if it was how many times it was repeatable, and not just my imagination. But yeah, look,
I think
probably
2 in a row. Yeah, you probably
it was
proved
2 in a
right?
row, and I've used a dimed plexi through this thing for many, many, many hours, and it's never had any problems other than those 2 times where I was, you know, big open E chord and then changed the reactive load, and then, but it didn't blow the head up. It would just pop the fuse. That's all, you know.
Yeah.
All
right. Let's talk about the first track in the video. It's just a bit of akadaka. Why did you choose that track?
Well, partly because I'd heard you play AC/DC on your channel when you're auditioning, you know, like a mod you've done or something like that. And I just thought, look, I mean, that's one of the classic rock and roll tube amp sounds of all time. I mean, no one would ever deny that. It's really, to me, it's that bridge between those early, slightly overdriven rock sounds of the 50s, say, you know, like you Chuck Berry and all of that stuff. Then to me, you've basically got Angus and Malcolm Young after that took it to like a next level, where it was kind of like a supercharged Chuck Berry kind of sound.
Yeah.
Classic old Marshall. And then of course from them you go beyond that. But I mean, it doesn't hurt that it's an Australian made amp and it's an iconic Australian band as well. And, you know, I grew up listening to all those early AC/DC records, and I just thought, I knew your passion for AC/DC, and I thought, man, let's re-record a bit of an AC/DC track. So that, to me, I mean, it depends on what the end goal of an amp design is, but to me, if it's tube and it's, you know, it's DNA, like obviously you've worked on so many Marshalls over your career that you just know them so well. And I just felt like, okay, before we even go into the weeds and really, you know, go esoteric with the kinds of different guitar sounds, let's get the most classic one of all time, AC/DC. And it was a great opportunity for the two of us to play each part and on different guitars, and then double track it and, you know, have fun trying to make it sound like the record. So that was the thinking with that.
Yeah. So I was playing your Gretsch.
My Gretsch, right? Yeah, hollow body, which is a great guitar.
Yeah, and you were playing my.
No, on that one I was playing
my.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It's actually just an Epiphone, but it's one of those limited edition ones that Andertons ordered in the UK. And so it's called a lemon burst with a flame. And so that's all that is. But that's not an expensive guitar. I did make some calls, ideally, of course, just for excitement factor for us. For you to play the hollow body Gretsch and for me to be on an SG would have been awesome. But
yeah, we tried to hunt down an SG, didn't we? But,
we did. You know, we did try and hunt down an SG, but it didn't happen before we had committed to shoot the video. So
what was interesting? Sorry,
yeah,
mate,
yeah, go on.
No, you go.
No, I'm done. No, you go.
Yeah, no. So I was just going to say for that track, right? Because I was thinking about, because obviously I knew what tracks we were going to do, when we kind of, I kind of did. Like, we'll talk about, there was a few things that happened on the day that, Simon, I think you just did on the spot, right? I don't think they were, you were just like, oh, I got an idea, let's play this, and you did it.
We had some core things that we knew we would like to get done, but there was obviously some stuff that if it occurred to us just while we were recording, we throw it in.
Yeah. So I knew that we were going to be doing this track, right? Because I had to brush up on my Malcolm skills beforehand.
Sure you did. No, I know you don't have to brush up on Malcolm, brother.
So anyway, but I didn't know. I didn't know exactly what setting we were going to use, right? And it's kind of like in each of these, dialing these tones was a bit of a discovery for me as we went, because I obviously had an idea of kind of like, the ballpark of how to set the amp to deliver that tone. But for this AC/DC one, I had kind of two options in my head going into it, right? Option one was channel 1, set in a kind of more of a classic 4-hole plexi style setup, which is basically the Bright 2 cap, the Bright 2 function on the amp brings in that really kind of aggressive old school, late 60s, early 70s non-master volume style Marshall setup.
Yep.
We ended up on the day using channel 2 in vintage mode. Yeah. And the settings are you can see in the video, right? I actually posted those up. I do want to actually load those graphics that I did of the settings for the amp. I will load those up on the website.
Yeah, cool.
So just good. I think they're just a good reference for anyone who just want to dial, quick and dirty dial something in. But that channel 2, that channel 2 in the vintage voicing it's more inspired by the master volume JMPs of the kind of early to mid 70s. So
70s. Yeah,
kind of the 2203 style of vibe. And interestingly, given when that album was recorded, and maybe someone can put a comment in the chat here, right? Because I don't actually know whether the brothers were using at that point old non-master volume 4-hole plexis, or had moved to the master volume JMPs by that point.
I don't know the answer to that either, but there's someone in the chat that very well may know the answer to that.
Yeah, someone might do. But we found in terms of kind of just like adjusting, trying to get that tone, capture that tone by ear, that the Alta set up more as the kind of master volume JMP style vibe was the thing that delivered the tone in the end.
I think that's really important to say at this point as we go through the tracks, and the inspiration for it is all the sounds, really, didn't we? We as much as I guess you as the designer and builder of the amp had a preconception of, okay, for that kind of guitar sound, probably it would be something like this. But really, at the end of the day, we just used our ear, and sometimes that ended up not being exactly what maybe you thought, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, there were a couple of tracks, I'm sure we'll get to them, right, where it was just like, I can't believe. I mean, I would never have dialed the amp in like that. There were a few of them where, and you'd be like, oh, can you give me a bit more of this or a bit less of this?
Yeah.
Because you were just doing by ear.
Jason was all hands on deck, like at the amp, as you would imagine. And then for whatever the track we were about to do is, I'd be at the studio desk with the guitar playing a bit and going, no, can you give me more, whatever it is, mids, more gain, less gain, more bottom end, can you give me more thump? And so I was just totally using my ear and not even looking at the controls. And then Jason was interpreting that. And then it was absolutely fascinating where we would see some of the controls end up for the sounds. But we got there with all of them. Yeah, it was just wonderful.
That was what was so cool about it, right? Because I kind of walked away with a whole lot of new kind of tone settings that I've never played with.
Hey, sorry everyone, I've got someone at the front door. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back.
Okay. It's always the danger when you're doing these streams at home, right? There's always going to be a courier that comes. The next the next track, guys, was the Nuno Betancourt He-Man Woman Hater. So when Simon's back, I'll get him to talk a bit about the guitar that he used for that video. I know there were a bunch of comments on the video itself on YouTube that asked about that red guitar and also the 7-string. He's got that kind of yellow 7-string as well. Both of them were custom made, is my understanding. Both of them were custom made for Simon. So we'll get him to talk about what those are and importantly, kind of what pickups and so on are in them. But for this one, again, I wouldn't have dialed the amp in like this to deliver the tone that we ended up with. Is the amp was set brighter than I was expecting. So we ended up in channel 3, and we're in the modern voicing for channel 3, right? No diode clipping in this, right? So this was just the channel 3 in modern mode, but with both of the bright voicings activated, which kind of brings in bright 1 and bright 2 on the amp activate independent bright caps. It's kind of a way to think of it. So you can run them both on together, and they parallel or add together, right? So you can kind of like, I guess there's 4 options. You can have them both off, either on or both on. And you can do that on all, each of channel 1, 2, and 3. So we had the amp set pretty bright in that regard. The presence was also up at about 7. And the gain on channel 3 was back a bit at kind of around about 4, which again, when you got the bright functions in and you bring the gain back on an amp like this, similar to bright caps on the the old Marshalls, the amp does kind of thin out a bit in terms of the bottom end. Yeah, so if you bring the gain up while you've got those bright caps in, you'll hear it start to fill out in the bottom end. So again, just being to the actual recording, and then the tones we're getting through Simon's monitors, we basically tone matched it. Simon, I was just saying that we had
That's all right. I still had my ears in, so while I was signing for,
so you didn't miss anything. So yeah, this is brighter. Yeah, this is definitely, the amp was set brighter than I would have. If you asked me to just pull this tone, I wouldn't have set it as bright as this, which I thought was interesting.
The other thing we were doing is in the Pro Tools session, I had the original versions of all the songs that we were doing. So if we felt like by instinct we were getting close, and even for me, it's really surprising when you flick to the original, you go, wow, okay, that's way brighter than I thought it was going to be, which was what you were saying about the Nuno tone,
Yeah.
It's pretty bright, and that's what, in a way, it's once you know that, it's not that surprising because his right hand is so percussive. He wants that edge and brightness to bring out the percussion in his right hand, and yeah, so that was definitely fun pulling that tone as well.
Let's go back to Terry's super chat here, and again, I said you probably heard. Hopefully, you heard while you were getting the door that there were a number of questions about the guitar.
I've got them here. I've got them here, so I can show them, and I can talk about the pickups that are in them if anyone's interested in that stuff. Hang on.
Go and grab it.
So
there we go.
I mean, most people would know about the Maton acoustic guitars, and famously Tommy Emmanuel has been playing them for decades. They make such great acoustic guitars. But I believe now they've reduced it just down to one electric guitar, which is sort of a hollow body based on a well, they haven't based it on a 335, but that would be the closest thing to for you to know what it is. But these ones, for a time, they were doing solid bodies, and so that's the guitar. And they built this for me because they're based here in Melbourne, where me and Jason are, and I've always over the years had a great relationship with them. And so what it is essentially, it's painted in Lamborghini orange for anyone that wants to know what that color is. And the pickups in it are just Seymour Duncan El Nico 2 Pros is what they are. So yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that, you know, mahogany body and neck. With this one's got a I forgot what the fretboard is now. Ebony fretboard. And then, you know, we just topped it up with some Lamborghini inlays instead of the dots. So you can see the Lamborghini bull there in mother of pearl, which
That's
is pretty
insane.
cool. So yeah, it's a great guitar. It's, you know, it doesn't have too many switches and things. It's just a meat and potatoes sort of, I guess the closest thing to liken it to would be like a Les Paul kind of a vibe. Somewhere between a Les Paul and a Paul Reed Smith, maybe, you know. So that's that one. Then the 7-string is essentially based on the same design, as you'll see from the color. Another Lamborghini color. This is Lamborghini yellow. Pickups are the same, actually. They're Seymour Duncan El Nico 2 Pros, but in the 7-string version. And both with, you know, the stop tail pieces. So no tremolos or anything on these guys.
Slightly different inlays on this one.
Yeah, so the inlays on the other one was after the Lamborghini model, the Aventador. This one's on the Diablo. So again, with the Lamborghini Bull, and then you can see DIA, Diablo as the dots. And then they were kind enough on the last few dots to put my initials, so that never hurts. Yeah, but yeah, gorgeous colors. And so this is this yellow 7-string you will see also on the Virgil Donati video on my YouTube channel, because we did a lot of 7-string stuff with that music. So yeah,
I noticed that when you when I rocked into your studio and I saw that 7-string, I recognized it straight away from the Virgil Donati show. Yeah, they're killer.
Yeah, they're really great guitars.
So man, the next one was the Holdsworth track, and this was certainly we wanted to cover. So because you asked me, you said, you know, what are some of the questions, what are the most common questions you get about the amp? You know, and I get lots of questions about the gain, of course, you know, how much gain has it got, and, you know, blah blah blah. But one of the more interesting questions I have had about the amp is what are the cleans like? How clean does it get? Is channel 1, can it get super clean? And importantly, which we will talk about in probably a couple of tracks time, is how does it clean up when you roll back the guitar volume? But so the Holdsworth track, I think, was really set up to, you know, kind of showcase, I guess, how clean the amp could be pulled together. But man, it's just in terms of let's talk a bit about that track itself, because you could have pulled any number of, you know, songs together to demonstrate a clean channel. So why did you choose that Holdsworth piece?
I
think it's a beautiful piece.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to hear the actual Holdsworth version of that, which does, you know, his rhythm section come in at some point, so he does the intro on his own. It's such a beautiful, haunting piece, really interesting, almost orchestral style chord movements, like harmonically. And as anyone that's even attempted to try and play any Holdsworth chords, I mean, that those guys' fingers were like spiders. It's actually really, really tricky, and it doesn't fall under my fingers at all. But that was a piece that I used to play like years ago, not because I would want to play it at, you know, there was no purpose to play it at a gig or anything like that. It was just something I wanted to learn because I always liked it. It's off his Metal Fatigue record, and it's a track called Home. But it's, when I was talking to Jason about, you know, we really need to showcase that this amp can do sparkling cleans. And just one of the first things that popped into my head was, you know, how clean and sparkly Alan Holdsworth's sound is on this particular track. So I thought, well, what better thing to demonstrate it than that? And the guitar I played it on is not It's not doing anything particularly special in terms of sparkling cleans. You know, an easy way to kind of get that is active pickups, for example. You know, things like that.
You were playing your white. It was a white Strat, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got it. I'll show people. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's. What's And were you on the neck? You just on the neck pickup?
No, I was on the combination of you know, neck and middle. So whatever you call that, position 4 on the toggle.
Position 4. Yeah.
This is like just a white Strat. The body and neck are just from a Fender Player series. So, you know, I think they're not very expensive. I think they're like $900 US, 1,000 maybe with the Floyd and everything. But what I did is I changed the pickups in it. So they're all bare knuckle pickups. So the single coils are Mother's Milks, which my intention for this sort of super Strat was to kind of have like an 80s Michael Landau kind of vibe. So in terms of the way that these Mother's Milk single coils are pretty close spec wise to Michael Landau's custom single coils. And the bridge pickup the same. That one is bridge pickup is, I think, the bare knuckle Van Halen 2. So pretty low output, offset winds. You know,
I've got one of those. Yeah, those are awesome.
Man, Tim at Bare Knuckle just builds such ridiculously good pickups. So did you use
that guitar for the Van Halen show?
This one? No. Yeah. But it's the same. It's that one's upstairs. But it's the same exact guitar that I ordered from, you know, my local music store, which is basically a Fender Player series with the humbucker and the Floyd. All I did with the one I used on the Van Halen video is just put black electrical tape on it, and that's it. So the pickups on that one, I've had a lot of people saying, yeah, but what pickups did you put in it? Nothing. They're the ones that come with the $900 guitar. So that's what I used for that. Yeah. Well, because it came only like a week before the gig, so I didn't bother changing anything. I just went, just put some tape on it. That'll do. So that's what I used for the Alan Holdsworth thing. And again, like I was saying, you use, you know, that second toggle. I can never remember whether you call that position 2 or position 4, but it's the combination of combination of neck and middle.
There's a position
out
2?
Of phase. Yeah. So
maybe someone can drop a comment on that as well.
Yeah, someone will let us know.
Yeah.
That hollow sort of glassy out of phase sound was perfect for that. And so how do we end up running the clean channel for that guy?
Yeah, so clearly channel 1. Interestingly, so the amp's got negative, obviously it's got variable negative feedback on the front. So that's the response pot. And you can actually do quite a lot, you know, with the overall voicing of the amp by adjusting that. And we had, so we had the depth, you know, on 3, we had the presence on 10, and then we adjusted the response pot. I'm looking at my settings here, about 9 of 10, which means the amp has very little negative feedback. So when you move the response pot up, guys, on the amp, that's reducing the amount of negative feedback, and the amp will become more lively and brighter. So again, kind of in terms of setting the power amp up, we had it pretty lively and bright. Channel 1 EQs all pretty much on noon, and the gain was back on 4. And we had, I think we tried it with no bright voicing in initially, and then you said, no, I want a little bit more sparkle on top.
Sparkle at the top, a
little bit more gold dust on the top. So we put bright cap 1 on, and for channel 1, bright cap 1 is just a really small value. So it's just for that, giving you a little bit of glass on top. If you activate bright 2 on channel 1, it's like an old Plexi bright cap where it just takes over, right? So bright 1 is way more kind of for that, you know, that kind of crystal clean kind of setting. So what I discovered from this was that setting the power amp up that way it meant that we didn't have to have the kind of the preamp set quite so bright. and
Yep.
in turn, I think it gave the preamp a bit more headroom. So getting that really kind of clean tone out of channel 1. It was a nice way to put it.
And sort of logically, that makes sense to me, that for that kind of really like super clean, glassy, clean tone, that you would be having the power amp do the heavy lifting with the sparkle and give your preamp some play and some headroom,
Yeah.
That sort of makes sense to me. The other thing that's, talking about the pickups again, they're not active. Just, I mean, if anyone doesn't know those bare knuckle pickups, super low output vintage 1960s Strat pickups. That's all they are. So there's nothing in terms of that's really adding to the sparkle. It's really the Alta 100 doing the heavy lifting there, which is great, because that's what we wanted to show. I mean, you could plug some 80s guitar, like a Steve Lukather model with EMGs in it, and you can get that sparkle out of pretty much anything. But no, so they're just super low output vintage.
You had the volume. You heard the guitar volume on 10.
Yeah. Apart from the 1 or 2 clips, which obviously we'll get to, where I rolled the volume back, and you can see me doing it like in real time in the clip. All other guitar volumes and tones are on 10. I'm one of those players that I've never messed around with guitar volumes on 5, 6, 7 and tone volumes on different. Like, to me, I guess it's because I did so much touring and so much recording work when I was in my 20s. I needed repeatability. And so like turning my tone down to get a particular sound and then forgetting what number that was on the next time round, that just drives me nuts. So I would rather just do all that with the settings on the amp, or maybe kick in an EQ pedal for a song if it's that important. But so all tones and volumes were, unless you see me roll it down on the video, are on 10.
Killer. And so for complete contrast, we then rolled into Meshuggah.
Of course, because contrast is the name of the game, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, this was a track that you put on the list, and you could have, to demonstrate kind of detuned metal. There's a whole bunch of things we could have chosen. What was it about Soulburn that you've always liked?
I've always adored Meshuggah, and I've always particularly liked this track off their album. I always get the words in the wrong order. I think it's Destroy, Erase, Create, or something like. Anyway, it's an older album now, but I love it. I love all the tracks on it. But this one, I don't know. It's just when I think of heavy riffs, and we started talking about, we've got to cover off the super modern metal thing, because I think that any new amp that's about to enter the ecosystem in this day and age, especially with what I know you really tried to cover with this, I really wanted to cover like a modern detuned thing. And so for me, it's one of the first things I thought of was this Meshuggah riff that I've always loved, which is just chunky and heavy, but there's space in it. So rather than doing a super fast chuggy thing, you tend to lose what the amp's really doing. If it's like, and it's more frantic, the transients start to bleed into each other. And I just thought that jung, 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 with all that air in between, you really get to hear what the amp's doing in between your pick attack. And again, I thought that would be another cool one that we could play together. And you used your Charvel, right? Which is not 7-string, but like a baritone. So totally tuned down.
Yeah, it's tuned. I ended up, so that's an orange sparkle super stock that I got on a trade with Brett Kingman. If anyone knows Brett from his YouTube channel.
Sure.
Yeah, and I had it set in just, standard E tune, probably tuned in E flat probably for a long time. And then I decided I needed to have, I guess when Jim Root started using an Alta, I figured I needed to have a guitar that was tuned the same as he had it. So that's got, I don't know, 11 to 56s or something on it.
Yeah,
and
cool.
It's tuned to B, B.
Yeah,
basically, right? So your high E string is C sharp, and the low E string is dropped to B. So we weren't sure whether we're going to, because I don't think Meshuggah play in a drop B tuning, right? This standard tuning, but just 7-string or whatever.
I think certainly on that record, I know now they tune way lower than that, and they play 8 strings and stuff. Like, I mean, they're way down into like bass guitar territory and further. But on that record, I think it was 7-string stuff. Yeah,
that was cool. So now that was super fun.
That was definitely fun. That it's funny. It's probably the style of music that you and I both least grew up with, but when you actually have to track it, damn, it's so much fun. It's just
it's cool. Yeah, you love the chunk.
So fun playing that. Awesome. Yeah, everyone loves the chunk. So I mean, that came out great too.
It did. So settings wise, guys, not surprisingly, this was we set the amp up, and this is the maximum gain you pretty much get out of the amp. So it was in channel 3, modern voicing, the clipping in, diode clipping, right? It gives extra compression.
Yeah.
Both bright caps engaged, so you get that real kind of that chainsaw high end, kind of chunk.
Yeah, that's important for that stuff for sure.
Yeah. Now we had again in terms of the power amp settings. This is another interesting kind of discovery for the amp, and having the ability to set up the power amp in terms of depth, negative feedback, and presence. This kind of modern metal kind of thing, I'd found this before, right? So when I did it in the studio with Simon, I kind of dialed this in pretty quickly, and we got this tone quite quickly. But basically, bringing the depth like almost all the way up, the response almost all the way off. So that means lots of negative feedback in the amp, and it really tightens it up.
But then when you turn the response off, right?
Yeah, but the amp gets darker as well. So then to kind of counter that, you bring the presence all the way up. So we had the presence on 10.
And the bright switches then, I guess, too, right? That's counteracting the fact that
Yeah, this is it, right? And then, treble up on 7 in the preamp, the mids back a bit, scoop the mids a bit. It's pretty typical. And the gain
don't need mids in that guitar sound.
No, man. And the gain we had at like 3 p.m. Right. So, again, I think the thing that was, I dialed the preamp in many times like this on the amp, but rarely had I set the power amp like that. I had kind of figured out that, that modern chunk kind of sound works pretty well with the negative feedback backed off or the response backed off. But it's not a typical setting that I would normally use. So it was cool. Now, the next track was the Brothers Osborne track, which is
using your Telecaster, sir.
Yeah. Well, man, I'd never heard.
Sorry, go on.
So you introduced me to these guys, right? I'd never, in my own little naive world, I'd never heard of them. So, but I have actually been listening to their stuff quite a bit since that day. And man, he's a ripping player.
Absolutely ripping. If anyone in the chat has not checked out the Brothers Osborne stuff, yes, it is kind of, I would call it Nashville country rock, probably like modern Nashville country rock. But of all the stuff coming out of there in the last, I don't know, say 5 years, 10 years, whatever, my favorite is these guys. They write really great songs, whether it's a ballad or whether it's just a fast rockin' country thing. Their live records are especially worth listening to because all the players in the band, and especially the guitarist, they do these big, long, open solos, just as you would in like a rock gig or a fusion gig. And man, they are ripping. It's really very impressive. It was, I'm very grateful that someone put them onto me. And so I thought, what would be great to cover off too, because I mean, that scene is huge, and to be able to get a great authentic Telecaster sound into a valve amp, I think is super important. And it's actually something that I have to do a lot. Like, for example, a lot of the recording sessions I have to do these days are for, I would call Nashville pop rock kind of stuff. But also when I'm touring with Daryl Braithwaite, a lot of his stuff is not all of it, but I'd say 20% of it. That's the tone that I have to get.
Yep.
So if I was looking for an amp that can do all the things, I need to know that it can do this kind of, you know, modern Nashville rock stuff. And you brought your Telecaster over, and it just sounded great. And as you can see in the video, I'm just plucking it with my thumb, you know, pulling on the strings to get the twang. And I got to say, I think we were both like, we pulled that sound up pretty quickly, and I wasn't sure if we were going to get that sound quickly. I thought we could get it, but I thought given the style of the Alta 100, it might take a bit more finagling, you know. But man, that sound came up great.
I agree, and I was again like pulling that kind of, you know, let's call it a kind of a tally into a Fender style of tone out of the Alta,
because that's what it is. It real, yeah. Like I mean, if you had to guess what that kind of player would be using, it'd be a Telecaster, a Fender amp, and maybe like a Noble's OD1 overdrive to give it that kind of spongy crunch. You know, I mean, they're the classic things for the last 20 years that those players have used. But we did it without a Fender and with no Noble's ODR1.
Yeah, that's straight into the amp.
It's just straight into the amp. But I mean, every time I've listened to that clip back, it just doesn't even sound. I mean, it sounds kind of like a overdriven Fender, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that I actually don't know what pickups are in that tally. I should know. It's an exotic. Someone might know, right? I could look it up, I guess.
I've got it here. Do you want me to put it on the screen?
Yeah,
for people?
You grab it.
Here, yeah.
So I picked it up secondhand. That guitar, bought it from a guy in Perth, which is on the other side of Australia from here. And it's obviously a heavy relic, as you can see, right?
Man, it looks unbelievable.
Yeah, it's cool. And
check out the flame on the back of the neck.
Yeah, the neck is unreal.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, there you go.
More relicking. Yeah. Although I think that was just my belt buckle the other day. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's got one of those beautiful unfinished kind of, you know, just oiled kind of, I think it's just a roasted neck, right? It's probably completely unfinished.
And you know what I like about it too? It's so balanced. Yeah, it's a roasted maple neck, but it's so light, but it's balanced. It's not neck heavy. Yeah. Killer.
Yeah. So that's just whatever those guitars come with. I don't know. I'll have to look it up and figure it out. But the pickups are just stock in there. And amp-wise, we're obviously on channel 1. This is with the second bright cap in. I've mentioned this a couple of times, right? So on channel 1, that bright 2 function, it's a 4700 picofarad bright cap for anyone that wants to know, which is the old Marshall value, you know, like the really aggressive Plexis 4-hole amps of the late 60s, early 70s. It's that vibe. And you know, with the amp set like that, we had the mids cranked on 10. This is kind of how I would dial a Plexi in, actually. When I set up, you know, non-master volume JMP, I would normally have the bass back a bit, you know, around midday. I'll put the mids on 10. I'll adjust the treble to taste, but normally around about 1 p.m. And then with that bright cap in place, I would have the volume on the treble channel of a Plexi around about 6. And that's kind of how we had it set. So it was,
right.
It was kind of dialed in a little bit like an old super lead, if you like. Yeah.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in my way less understanding of all of this than you, which in the Plexi itself was then kind of based on a Fender Bassman originally. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So in a way, having your clean channel on the Alta 100 set up sort of like a Plexi would be the most way that you would make it sound like as if a telly was plugged into a Fender Bassman. So really, that logically, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, it's just a question of how, like, you know, on the Alta, you can play with those bright functions to kind of like, you know, how you want to go at the aggressive end of a Plexi or at the more kind of mellow JTM 45 end of a, you know, of a 4-hole kind of amp. But you're right that, you know, that circuit, you could trace it back to, you know, the JTM 45 obviously been lifted from a Bassman.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, there's a lot of DNA That's shared, no doubt
Yeah.
about that. Right, the next track was George Lynch, It's Not Love, and
Oh yeah.
my memory is that this was done completely on the fly because
Oh yeah, that was just something that I think what I was doing is when I picked up my 5150 replica guitar, I just started playing that riff, and it sounded so good straight away with whatever settings you were dialed in. I was like, oh dude, we've got to throw that in, because I couldn't believe George Lynch's sound. To me has always been quite unique. It's got a strange, I don't know, it's not hollow exactly. It's got this kind of nose to it, like it almost sounds a little bit like he has a cocktoir on it, even though of course he didn't, was not to my knowledge anyway. It is probably coming from his hands, it's just how he heard his guitar sounding, and so that's how it sounded through. And as far as I know, he used to use dimed plexis as well back in the day, back in the 80s. And so when we were mucking around with, dialing in that sound, I played the George Lynch riff, and it's just, I couldn't believe how much it sounded like it had that same sort of on the nose, slightly hollow cocktoir sort of sound. And so that's why we threw it in.
And it was
simple as that.
Well, you picked up the 5150 guitar, and we started having a conversation about the how well does the amp clean up with the guitar volume.
Yeah, well, that was another thing that not only do I know was important for you, because you get a lot of people asking that, but it's whenever I talk about an amp to someone, one of the first things that they'll say is, yeah, but how well does it clean up when you roll the volume back? I think that's a real focus these days with distorted amps. And so we were like, okay, so let's do it. So that 5150 replica, obviously it's no frills. It's just got a humbucker in it and one volume pot. So we thought, well, if we're going to try it with anything, let's see how well this humbucker cleans up on a pretty gainy setting,
Very gainy.
And as you can hear from, and I'll let you explain the settings in a minute, but as you can see in the video, I mean, even just a 50% roll off, it just cleans up, but it stays articulate. It doesn't, there's no mid-range woof. It doesn't get muddy. And then you can see, like, to play the Michael Landau piece, I roll it off even a bit more.
Yeah.
And you do find sometimes that when you roll, and it depends on lots of things, the value of your volume pot and all this stuff, but you can roll your volume off a little and it stays kind of crispy and articulate, but you roll it off more and then all of a sudden it goes muddy, or vice versa. It'll go muddy at first, but then it gets articulate. I think we proved, without really meaning to, that if you roll your volume off a bit, it stays articulate. You roll your volume off even more. I mean, for the Landau thing, I must have been on 1 or 2. Like, it was.
Oh, you were way back. Yeah. Yeah, it was way back.
I mean, you can see in the video, I've rolled that back a lot, and it's still articulate all the way from 100% volume to 50% volume down to 20% volume. There's no muddiness anywhere in that arc, and I think that and that was wonderful for me, because I can honestly say that's one of the few amps I've played with gain, with no pedals and no buffers and no bits and pieces in between, where it stays that open and articulate all the way through rolling your volume off.
I think you picked up, yeah, man, because you picked up that guitar because it was a simple, as you said, right? There's no trickery there in terms of changing pickups or whatever. It was like, it's a one humbucker guitar. So if we're going to demonstrate how the amp cleans up, then let's choose.
But also no tone controls either.
No tone controls. So like, let's choose that.
Fake it with tone controls. Yeah.
Let's choose that guitar. Yep. And then you started playing the Michael Landau piece, which is again just a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah, it is.
And we were getting ready to record it, and you said, oh, what we should do is we should play something high gain and then roll off and let it, and like have the, have the audio and the camera run to show how, how the amp cleans up.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I was like, yeah, let's do that. And then and it was like, well, what are you going to do? And you went, I know, this is a George Lynch tone. And so you learnt that George Lynch track. I know it's not the most complex thing, but you literally turn around on your laptop and played it.
Yeah.
Like listened to it and then turn around and played it. And we recorded it just like that. So it was very much on the fly, that one.
Totally on the fly. And that's why, like, in the outtakes part of the video, you can hear me commenting on, oh, I love that open string thing or whatever.
Yeah.
It's because I'd heard that track heaps of times when I was a teenager from Dokken, but I'd never actually ever worked it out. And so, like, just sitting there, you and I had put the kettle on and I was figuring it out. I was like, man, that's a cool riff. Very cool.
Yeah, and you said the open string. You love the open string, which is cool.
Yeah,
nice.
because I never.
Those discoveries are cool.
You don't expect with those sort of 80s, like 2-note dyad power chord riffs for there to be open strings involved necessarily. But it's just, that was one of my favorite things to discover about it.
That is cool.
But you're right. It was a great way of demonstrating that you can go from like full 80s gain and just roll off your volume. No changing of pickups, no changing of tone controls, and it just cleans up, but it's sparkly, even with a humbucker that you're not splitting, like a full humbucker. I think that says a lot.
In terms of the settings on the amp, guys, this was channel 2 in modern mode, and I will say that in terms of the development of the amp, which is kind of like, I'll be honest, there was a year of elapsed time working on this thing for me, from the kind of beginning of the ideas around features and how this thing would be put together and what tones I wanted, to the point where we kind of got the first amp out the door. It was at least a year. But I spent probably the most time on getting channel 2 to what I wanted it to be, because I thought that was the center point of the amp, and so like, channel 1 is obviously one side of it, and then channel 3 the other, and so you kind of like, you got to get that north star, if you like, of channel 2 lined up, and then everything will fall into place after that. So I spent a lot of time trying to get that tone, and I'm probably the same as you, man. I grew up listening to all the same stuff, so that the way the amp was dialed on for this part of the video is exactly the same as was used for Mean Street at the end. And of course, when I was trying to dial in channel 2, particularly with when the clipping come, the diodes come in, the clipping diodes, which again, guys, that just gives more kind of compression into the amp. If that ed tone was clearly something that I was trying to capture in channel 2. So when you dialed it in for the George Lynch thing, and we ended up using the exact same settings for the Mean Street track. That was cool.
Well, that's cool because, both Ed, like we were talking about just before, both Ed and George Lynch used a dime plexi. I'm sure that I'm right with the George Lynch thing. We know Ed did, but I think back in the 80s, George Lynch was doing essentially the same thing, and so that's why the fact that it ended up being the same settings for both with the same guitar. But yet, isn't it interesting? The George Lynch riff doesn't sound like Eddie and the Mean Street riff at all. Even though it's the same guitar with the same settings. It sounds, to me, it sounds kind of like George Lynch. And I don't know whether that's because the way that the riff is written, so it's subconsciously, because you listen to his riff that he wrote, it sounds like him, and Eddie's stuff that he wrote sounds like Eddie. But amazing that even with the same settings, it sounds like two different guitarists. To me, it does anyway. Maybe to someone else, it sounds the same, but to me, I hear a difference.
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? I guess it's back to what you said. We were talking about the tone pyramid, and obviously the biggest influence on all that is the player, and I guess the musical setting that they're in as well. But yeah, like that, I mean, it's the same. Comparing to the Fair Warning tone, Mean Street, it's the same guitar, same settings on the amp, same player. So it doesn't
sound the same, does it? It's weird.
Amazing.
Man, the psychology of music is endlessly fascinating.
It is. It is. Man, the next track, which is probably the one I was going into the day pretty excited about doing, well, watching you do it anyway, was Rosanna.
Oh man, I mean, who doesn't love playing Steve Lukather licks? That's just that's about the most fun that
not many of us can, so that's the only problem.
I appreciate that, but I mean, there's plenty of people, of course, that can play Steve, but for me, look, I think Steve is one of the great unsung heroes of all influential guitarists over the last 30 years, say. You've got your sort of Greek god heroes, if you want to call them that, and that could be your Hendrixes, your Claptons, your Eddie Van Halens, and for other stuff, your Yngwie Malmsteens, and people that just redefined what could be done on a guitar. But Steve Lukather, for me, I mean, his guitar licks and his musicality that I grew up with, equally as much as Ed's and Hendrix and everybody else, and Robin Ford and Eric Clapton. Lukather has a thing of his own that no one sounds like Luke, and no one probably ever will. And man, it's playing Luke's licks is a way of feeling like you're connecting to him in a way that is very few joyous things to do. So if anyone hasn't ever sat down trying to figure out Steve Lukather solos and play them along with Toto, please do. You will be smiling from ear to ear. They're really fun solos to play. So yes, I knew straight away if we were going to do like a early 80s kind of Les Paul type of vibe through the Alta 100, we had to play some Lukather. Had to.
I thought, because man, I was, as I said, man, I was pumped about this part of the day. Like I was looking forward to this. I think, man, this is going to be so awesome. I actually thought you were going to play the main solo. I don't know why.
Well, initially that was my thought, but then I thought, man, there's just something about that outro solo that's more improvised, more ripping,
Yeah, this is true, man. 1,200 recording sessions, amazing. Doesn't sound the same, yeah.
Yeah, and if anyone's read Luke, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say. So when we sat down to do it, and you queued up the outro piece, I was like, oh man, this is even better, because he's just ripping there. I was just blowing. The thing, what I was going to say, my biggest discovery from that piece in terms of Luke's playing, and I'm pretty sure we talked about this at the time, was the phrasing in that. He sounds like a sax player.
Totally.
It blew me away. Like, because I listened to that 500 million times, right? But it never occurred to me until I saw you play it that the little roll-offs and stuff, like, just like a sax player would. It was amazing.
It's really, it's totally true. Luke grew up with Larry Carlton and players like that, but also, he grew up in an era where all of him and his friends as teenagers, Jeff Porcaro, Michael Landau, everyone that in that little LA clique, they were listening to so much jazz. So it was inevitable that in their rock licks would be this sprinkle, like the herbs on a bolognese of jazz, and that's why you talk about those roll-offs, like and the sidestepping, they're basically tenor sax licks, and I think that even though as a kid I didn't listen to jazz, the thing that made me go and study jazz later, I would say Steve Lukather and Robin Ford, because even though they're not really known as, they don't fall under the jazz umbrella, they had enough jazz in them it made me curious about what are all these extra notes, these accidental notes that, these chromatic roll-offs. But that's why, to me, I feel like Steve Lukather is the perfect blend of just balls to the wall, Les Paul into a Marshall rock, but with just like 5% sprinkling of jazz, Miles Davis and Michael Brecker or whatever, that to me is a really interesting guitar playing. And so that's why Rosanna, why not? And the outro solo just goes for longer. That's why I thought that would be cool. Well, okay, so the solo in the middle of the song, of course, is more constructed because really it's a melody.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a melody. It's da, 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 then up the octave. It's beautiful, but I just thought, let's have some fun. We'll do the ripping one at the end.
And there's a lick that he plays at the end of the worked out solo. He kind of revisits it a little bit, doesn't he? In the solo at the end, the little where he kind of slides up a bit into it.
Do you mean the one that goes that long line that goes down?
Yeah.
I mean, if anyone's found the isolated track of his guitar solo to that on YouTube, that solo goes way longer than what's on the recorded version, and you can hear the whole thing of him just making it up and riffing and slipping off strings, and it's just wild. You can just tell.
Oh, wow. I haven't listened to that. I'll have to check it out.
Oh, you've got to find that. Yeah. There's
like
there's at least an extra 30 seconds of him just ripping beyond what anyone's ever heard on the album version.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So this was played. Simon was playing my 81 Gold Top, which anyone who's watched the channel, anyone watched the channel would have seen me play that guitar a bunch of times. It's got a set of Shaw Thornbucker pickups in it, not the plus ones, just the normal straight up Thornbucker. Yep. So kind of the low output PAF style pickups, right? The amp was set in channel 2 in modern voicing. Again, this was an interesting discovery because I think we chatted about, what did we think Luke recorded with at that time? And, we both thought that he probably just had his old Plexi cranked, old Marshall.
I'm pretty sure, I'm 99% sure from the books that I've read and, things you listen on podcasts online that at that time, for the solos, at least on the records, he was using his 59 Les Paul and a Plexi.
Yeah. So we had channel 2, interesting, and this was another interesting discovery in terms of like tone matching it, that for the alto, we had channel 2 modern voicing, both bright caps on. We had the response pot way up, like an old Plexi, right? They're really lively, not much negative feedback in an old Plexi, right? So we kind of turned the response pot all the way up. Well, it was on about maybe close to 3 p.m.
Yep.
To kind of give it that brightness and liveliness. But the gain, we turned
that right. We kept turning it down and down and down, didn't we? To get that Luke tone.
You were like less gain, which no guitar player says ever. Only you. Less gain. We're like, really, dude? Are you sure? You're like, yeah, less. So we ended up with.
But you know what happened while we were doing that though? The more gain sounded great just on its own. But as soon as we started playing on top of the drums and bass for the track, for the the rhythm section, it didn't. The pick attack, the transients didn't sound right, and I knew we were going to get more transient and that Luke pick attack if we wound the gain back and cleaned it up a bit.
Yeah. So, I guess the interesting thing here for me was channel 2 in modern mode with the brights in, and the gain back at 4. We had the gain back at 11 a.m.
Yeah,
with the mids cranked all the way up, back to how I was talking about how I would set a Plexi up anyway.
Lots of mids. Yep,
that sounds like a cranked super lead, So that was again not something that I was kind of expecting to come across, but that's where we ended up.
That's why I'm really excited for part 2, because now that you have come across these unexpected settings for us just using our ears, when we do a whole bunch of other different guitarists and tones, does that give us a head start with your predictions of settings, or is it going to be just as interesting?
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, I think I certainly know now, right, going into it, that I can just forget about any preconceived ideas that I might have, and just go and just trust our ears,
it's the only way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just going back to a question that Brad threw on the chat here, which is back to the Token EVH tone. So the Master 2 was on, so that's the it's got 2 global master volumes for anyone that doesn't know the amp. So that was on because we had the clipping on, diode clipping. If anyone's played with this in an amp before, it's like the SAT, like Dave's SAT switch.
SAT switch in a Friedman, right? Yeah,
very similar, right? You'll notice that when you click it on, you get a drop in volume. And so the idea with the second master volume on the amp was to give the ability to, I mean, you could use it for a solo boost in a live setting, but you could use it in this scenario where if you've got a couple of settings that you're recalling, one has clipping on and one doesn't, you can use the second master volume to normalize the volume. So Brad, we set the second master volume to be, above master one, so that with the diode clipping on, it was the same volume as master one when it was off. And we would have had master one set at about probably 6 or 7 on the rear of the amp, right? About 1 p.m., maybe 1 to 2 p.m., somewhere around there. So the amp was pretty loud, but as I said, we're going back to the Waza conversation. We had washed a little bit of volume off with the Waza, so we weren't blowing the neighbors away.
We didn't actually wash that much off, if you recall. We brought it. I mean, if the unity on the Waza was, say, 9 out of 10, I think we had it washed only back to about 6 or 7. Yeah. Because we didn't want to wash it back so much that then the speaker cone movement starts to change its tone. So we really only dialed it back so that if we kept going for another 5 hours, I wasn't going to get evicted. It was really just for that. We knocked off 3 or 4 dB probably. We
were just sitting under the threshold of getting kicked out of your house. Right?
That's right. That's right. So so it wasn't like we were playing at bedroom levels at all. Like it was still, it was still healthy out in the amp room. Yeah.
Yeah. Alex here. Alex, so Sirius is Alex Catlow, if anyone doesn't know. Alex is also based in Melbourne, another talented amp builder. And Mike Stern, man, just on the jazz players. I've been following that guy since, I don't know, my 20s, I reckon. He's an amazing player.
I love Mike Stern. Quite honestly, I mean, I bought a lot of his CDs. We'd be talking early 90s, probably, when I was really starting to deep dive into more jazz and jazz fusion and stuff like that. And I liked him, but I didn't I didn't click in the way, you do with some players until I went and saw him live here in Melbourne.
Yeah. Same.
And I was sitting right down the front. And man, the way that he would build a solo from nothing to make you feel like you were about to poo your pants, like after like 10 minutes of just building, and then like he'd hit another pedal and then build it louder and hit another. And I was like, oh, dude, this is not what's on the record, because obviously the record's a more studio condensed version. But Mike Stern live, that was when it clicked for me. And I just went, oh my God, that's one of the greatest live guitar experiences I've ever had.
He's amazing. He
really is.
You just have to like chorus a lot if you're going to listen to Mike.
Yeah. I've never been a huge fan of chorus, but he does use it pretty subtle.
Yeah. I know. I'm just teasing.
I know. Yeah. But it suits the way he plays though perfectly. Like it wouldn't.
It's hard to imagine him without it. Actually, now that you say that,
that's right.
I can't imagine him without it. Yeah.
Whereas chorus for me would make me feel not like me. I like the directness. I don't like the way it washes out the transient as much. Yeah.
I feel too much like Andy Summers or someone like that. Yeah. So Brad, just the Master 2, just to level match them, right? So you're not getting any loss of volume.
Beautiful. Hold for Jason. The bathroom, that herbal tea's going straight through. I'll be right back, kids.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yes, Alex. The chorus. Yeah, well, I think I don't know, guys. I mean, is chorus one of those love-hate things? It's I think it's certainly an effect that's come in and out of fashion, hasn't it? And so, as we sit here in September of 23, is chorus in or out? I don't know. You guys tell me. The next track we played was Malmsteen. Now, right at the beginning of the stream, I introed Simon and talked about the 2019 guitar show, which is up on his YouTube channel. Nearly 300,000 views on that, when they played VH1 in track order, front to back. Well, at the 2023 guitar show, which was back in March of this year, Simon came back and did a similar concept, but with Malmsteen. So he played the trilogy album with a full band, in track order, note for note. And I was lucky enough to, see that again live and in the flesh, and it was awesome. He was using the that same Strat, actually. I'm pretty sure when he comes back on the chat he can confirm, but I'm pretty sure for that gig he used the same Strat that he used in the video here, and he was using his Sir SL68 for that gig, with probably the DOD overdrive pedal that that Yngwie used, or probably still uses. But for this video, for the track, again, we no pedals, right? So we had to dial the amp up for this tone. And again, I think the thing that was surprising for me in terms of achieving this tone was how much gain we had to dial into the amp to get that sound, right? And so it was one of those ones where I think I started this thing on channel 2, getting the Yngwie sound, Simon. I think.
Yep.
I think I started this with you, and you'd be, you're playing and kind of warming up, and we're trying to dial the tone. And then I started on channel 2, thinking, it's probably where it is, and you were like, no, more gain. And I was like,
that's right. Which is funny because everyone knows Yngwie says more is more.
More is more. How can less be more?
How can less be more? It doesn't make sense. And so with the gain, I mean, we ended up going to, it was like a Meshuggah level of gain.
All the way. It was Meshuggah. In fact, it was more than Meshuggah, because we ended up with
more than Meshuggah. Yeah.
We ended up with the gain on 10. So it was the same configuration in terms of the settings, like channel 3, clipping on, modern voicing. Both bright caps on, but it didn't matter in the end because we had the gain on 10. So the bright caps are kind of have no impact.
It becomes less relevant as you turn the gain up. Those mode settings have less of a difference, right?
But it was definitely more is more, because I'm looking at the settings here, and we had the mids on 10, we had the treble on 9 or 8.5, the bass back, at 3. So like 10 a.m, I guess.
Yeah, Malmsteen sound is not very bottom heavy, and actually neither is Eddie's. Most of those kind of dimed plexi sounds are not very. There's really no thump, not really. It's sort of perceived thump.
Yeah, so it's way more gain than I expected. And you used your blonde Strat.
I did. I used my. Yeah. So it's the buttercream Strat with Damasio HS3s, which is what Malmsteen used in that era in the 80s. That's what he was using. So
it's a stacked. Is it a stacked single coil?
Yeah, they're kind of like the Seymour Duncan early version of those stacked singles. So much warmer than a vintage single coil. Like, they don't have that sparkle and that snap. They're higher output, of course, and less noise. I can't actually recall if they're completely noiseless. I have a feeling not completely, but definitely like way less noise than a vintage Strat pickup. So, which is important, because with the amount of gain that Malmsteen uses, which is way more than you would think. Jason and I were talking about this yesterday. The only difference really in the way that Malmsteen runs his plexi to the way that Eddie ran his plexi, the only difference is that instead of all the tone controls being dimed, his tone controls are at about midday, but the volume is still on 10.
Okay.
Right. So yeah. So,
and with no variac, right? He's running at mains, normal mains.
And with no variac, because what he doesn't want for the way he plays with a single coil, he actually doesn't want that sponge. In a funny kind of way, lowering the input voltage with the Variac kind of gave Eddie this kind of more, I can't think of a better word than spongy, but it makes the attack of the note kind of dip and bloom, almost like you've got a compressor on it.
Definitely.
But to me, that's what a single coil pickup does naturally. So it's sort of interesting that Eddie was almost making his humbucker behave more like a single, and Yngwie was, using single coils, didn't need that. It was already spongy enough because of the single coil factor, even if it was stacked.
That's super interesting, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So he didn't use a Variac. And as we all know, he likes it crazy, 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 super loud. So he didn't need to try and turn it down either. But yeah, what I discovered in my deep dive going through Yngwie's tone is especially his 80s tone, which is my favorite one. Like from the Trilogy record, that's to me when he sounded the greatest guitar tone wise, which was a Plexi on 10. Tone controls at midday with a DOD 250 preamp, which I happened to get my hands on a really old cast iron one. And that is a noisy unit. So that's why Yngwie has, even in his signature Marshall head, has a noise gate built in, because you have to have it. The noise is almost as loud as the notes. It's pretty nuts, actually. So, so with the Alta 100, what we found is we really needed to get that level of gain was channel 3 with the gain on 10.
Channel 3 with the gain on 10. Just as an aside, that signature head that he's got. Have
you ever played through one of those?
No, but a guy's bringing around one next week for me to work on. It's got some problem with it.
Dude,
so that's my first look at it.
I've got to come around to your place and I'll bring the SL68 and the DOD 250. It'll be very interesting to see what sort of job Marshall have done with his signature modern head compared to his 80 sound.
It will be. I know that this amp, so the problem with this amp, just as an aside, guys, is the guys called me up yesterday, and he's like, yeah, watch your channel. Can I bring my amp over? Blah, blah. I said, what's the problem with it? And he said, it's a YJM 100. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, that's
is that cool. The problem with it?
I went like, okay, so isn't that a Plexi just with like other smart technology in it? And he said, yeah. And I said, so what's the problem with it? And he said, it's got auto biasing. I didn't know this, but I do know now. So that amp will, apparently you can put any tubes in it.
Yeah.
And it will detect the natural kind of, bias at idle of that tube and then auto adjust
to it. Yeah, right.
Auto adjust itself. And of course something's gone wrong with that part of the circuit. And I was just like, oh God. It's like not a problem that I want to
that sounds like
deep
a headache.
Into, but I stupidly said, yeah, bring it round. I'll have a look.
Okay.
But I'm interested in the amp for sure. I'm interested in kind of like what, how this thing sounds.
Sure.
I'm going to ask
me
you,
too.
man,
I've never played through one actually.
Yeah, man, we'll check it out once I get it going. What actually? Let's go back to this. Brad's got a question here. Yeah, I noticed that too, Brad. You've got the pickup set really low on that strap.
I don't have it super handy. It's in a gig bag, but I can of course go and grab it if you would like. Cool. But it's the reason with all my strats, all of them, whether they're sort of a Malmsteeny vibe strat or whether it's just a regular one, my neck pickup and middle pickup are basically at the same height as the scratch plate. Yeah. And the reason for that is simply that because when I go from neck pickup to bridge pickup, I want a little bit of extra mid-range and volume boost. I want that. I don't want them to be equal level. The kind of things you'll do on a bridge pickup, like the main riffs of a song, or even Malmsteen quite often. And actually you'll see it in the song Fire that I played in the Alta video. About 2/3 in, it sort of changes gears and you'll see me flick to the bridge pickup. Right. I naturally want that to lift. I don't want that to be equal volume. I want it to be brighter. And obviously its tone is different because of where it's placed with regard to the bridge. But I also want it to have a bit more volume and punch. And the only way to do that when you're using that much gain, if you're playing the shadows and you're using a clean sound, you don't need to have that much discrepancy in your pickup heights, because clean, because of the bridge pickups near the bridge, it's naturally going to sound louder, right? Because of the different sort of frequency response and everything. But when you're playing with lots of distortion, you need a really big height difference between the bridge and the neck, so that even if you want a tiny perceived bump with the bridge, like 1 dB, for example, you need that bridge pickup nearly sitting like right under your strings, and you need the neck pickup on the floor.
Way down.
And so that's why.
Interesting. And
it's not for any silly tonal reason other than I just want, when I go from neck to bridge with distortion, everything I'd ever play on a neck pickup is going to be more bluesy. It's going to be more like Ian Moss or something like that. And it's naturally going to have a bit more of a mellow sound. So I don't want it to jump up in volume. If you have the neck pickup and bridge at the same height with distortion, your neck pickup will be louder.
It'll overpower it. Yeah.
It overpowers the bridge. And I never, ever want that, because the bridge is what I'm going to play the riffs with.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense.
And man, in terms of the choice of fire, because you could have played, again, you could have chosen a bunch of Malmsteen solos to showcase.
Yeah.
What was it about? What is it about that particular piece or solo that you dig?
I've always loved that solo. Ever since I was 13 years old, I've loved that solo.
Yeah, nice. Awesome.
That's one of my favorites off the trilogy record. Another one, for anyone that's curious, it would be my second favorite solo off that album, would be the one in Magic Mirror. But I like the way that the chords move. I think it's an interesting blend. It's easy to get caught in the trap playing Malmsteen, where you pick something that's just shredding the whole way through. It's just lots of sweep picking, lots of arpeggios, lots of trills. I feel like that fire solo, for me anyway, I think it's a really great combination of some super idiomatic Malmsteen fast licks, but also with some big, wide, expressive, passionate bends. I really like his phrasing through that solo more than some other solos, where it's just, you can tell it's like a race car driver off the line. He's just ripping from the start to the finish. That's fine, but I'd rather play a Malmsteen thing where I feel like there's some passion in the phrasing, and so that's why I picked that one.
It's a solo that you can hum it. You know what I mean? Like it actually carries a melody. It's one of the things that yes, one thing I was going to say about his playing that always, I could never play any of his stuff, right? But I've always loved him since I was, I had I remember I had the Rising Force album, right?
Yep.
The first one, and I listened to it 5 million times. The thing that always struck me about his playing is even in the really fast stuff, is that over the top of that there's an implied melody.
There 100% is.
You know what I mean?
And a video, no, I totally do. One of the things that sometimes when I get a guitar student that's particularly interested in Yngwie and I teach them some things, one of the things that they're always struck with, which I learned early when I was, playing the solos at half speed, trying to figure them out, is you could play one of his solos on a nylon string classical guitar at half speed with those beautiful classical chord changes, and none of its interest is lost, even at 50% speed. And I think that that's what a lot of people don't understand with Yngwie. And so I'm going to do a YouTube video on my channel where I'm going to play that fire solo on a nylon string at half speed, but with just violins in the background. And it's one of the most prettiest melodies at half speed. It's just that he happens to be ripping it, blistering gain and blistering volume at double speed, but I think, you can do the same with Eddie. You can do the same with Stevie Ray Vaughan. You can do the same, any to me of the great musicians of our time, whether it's rock guitar, whether it's classical, it doesn't matter. Their music will still speak at half the speed. It's just that they happen to have the technical facility to be able to play it at double the speed and scare us all to death. But, and that's for me what separates the term shredder to me is kind of it's like a vaguely dismissive term, isn't it? They're a shredder. But to me, the ones that have stood the test of time, so whether that's Yngwie, Eddie, Paul Gilbert, doesn't matter who it is, their music would sound great at half speed because it's well constructed and it's well thought out. It's just that they've got technical facility to be superhuman is all, you know.
Man, you got to do that video. That would be, I'll look forward to hear that.
All right, I promise I will.
String. Yeah, man, that'd be
half speed on a nylon string with violins playing the chords. I'm going to do that. Okay.
That would be absolutely killer. All right, man.
Cool.
We're nearly through these. The next one was Martin Taylor, the jazz piece, right, which you played on the Gretsch.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was another one that was pretty spur of the moment because that was, you know, we covered off some clean stuff with cleaning up the volume with Michael Landau and the George Lynch thing. And then we did that dedicated super clean on Channel 1 with the Holdsworth thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, quite often, if I've got to take an amp to a session, I don't even know what they're going to throw at me. Is it going to be country stuff with the Telecaster? Do they want me to play some hollow body jazz? And I just thought, well, while we're doing this and we're really trying to be as broad as possible, let's pull the Gretsch back out and just play some jazz on the clean channel. And so that's how that came about. That was another one of those unplanned kind of things. But I think it sounds great and it sounds warm. It sounds, I mean, you can go online and hear Martin Taylor play Stella by Starlight. I don't actually know what amp he's using and stuff for his YouTube recordings, but you'll hear it's right in the ballpark. It's not dissimilar at all. And you know, Martin Taylor's obviously got completely different fingers to me, way better at doing that stuff than I'll ever be, and with a different guitar, different pickups. But I just thought, shit, while we're at it, let's
it sounded
play some hollow
like
body jazz.
Yeah, it had that nice woody. It had
Woody,
that nice woody tone about it for sure. Interestingly, the amp was set pretty similar to the Holdsworth setting.
So therefore, the guitar and the fact that I was playing, I played with Flesh of My Fingers for Holdsworth. Really? So it's the guitar that's the difference then?
Pretty much. I mean, I'm looking at the settings here, and again, that's posted in the video, right? You guys, anyone can go back and kind of A/B it, but maybe this is set, if anything, slightly brighter to compensate. Probably.
I would never have guessed that. So the Martin Taylor one set brighter than the Holdsworth one.
I think it might be. Yeah, looking at the sound, got the Presence. The Presence was on 10.
Well, I never would have guessed that. So there you go.
You know, we've got the treble up at 3 p.m. You know, the bass is right back at like 9 a.m. You know, right back at like maybe 3, and response is about it's kind of not far from midday actually, so kind of middle of the road. But I'm just on the fly here from memory. I'm pretty sure that'd be a little bit brighter than the Holdsworth, and it would be compensating because the guitars are so you couldn't get two different, like that Strat
completely different. Well, also what you've got to keep in mind is that Gretsch will be way higher output than the Strat with the bare knuckle mother's milk pickups, which are low output vintage Strat pickups, right? So much higher output. Now it's a great lesson just again in you got to use your ears, because my instinct for doing a hollow body jazz thing would have been to take all the presence and treble off, and completely reconfigure it to what you imagine your settings would be for that more mellow, dark jazz tone. But with that Gretsch, you leave your presence up and it worked great.
Yeah, it came out cool. Now the last track in the video, now we didn't actually record them in this exact order, guys. So one of the things we were kind of like, I don't know how the sequence that we recorded them in just was like, or whatever we felt like doing next pretty much. But when we edited the video, we had a few different kind of playlists, if you like, and ended up with the batting order that we ended up with. It's kind of like, it felt like the most natural flow. But I think we always wanted to end with an Eddie track. And
well, why not?
Why not? And it's probably the longest.
End with Ed.
It's probably the longest of all of them too. But that's no argument from me on that. This was the same settings as we've already said, right? We're back to the settings that we had for the
George Lynch thing.
And the rolled back same as the Michael Landau rolled back sound. And again, probably as I said, in terms of the work voicing the amp, the thing I put the most hours and days and weeks into was getting this channel 2 tone that we wanted. So I was really pleased, just kind of in terms of kind of like getting the sound that I hoped I could get from this amp when we were A-Bing this tone to the record.
Yeah,
man,
which we did with everything where possible, didn't we? We really wanted to see if without any pedals and without any sort of Pro Tools, mucking around with plugins and stuff, how close, just with the settings on the amp, we could get it to the album tone that everybody knows and loves of these things. So yeah,
because you had backing tracks for this one, for Mean Street. You had a backing track with no guitar in it, like the actual recording.
I certainly did. That's just, I found the isolated track of Alex's drums, and I found the isolated track of Michael Anthony's bass, and I put them together, and that's what I played on top of. And for anyone that is interested about how we did all that, that's also what I did with Rosanna. I found the stem of Jeff Picara's drums, David Page's piano playing, and I put them together and basically made a track minus the vocals and guitars. All the other tracks that have drums and bass is me programming up the drums and bass behind it. So the Meshuggah, the AC/DC, and the other things. Yeah,
killer. But that meant for this VH track, we could actually A/B your recorded guitar over that backing against Ed's recorded guitar.
The album recording, yeah.
And this is where I was like, oh man, that sounds pretty close to me.
Well, considering we're not diming your output stage, we're not using a variac, we're not using any kind of preamp into the front, which Ed pretty much always did. There was a lot of pieces of that puzzle. If you were really going to try and get the Alta to do it, Ed, we would probably be forgiven for doing all those other things with it, right? And just treating it like an old Plexi and say, all right, let's see what happens. But we deliberately decided not to do that because we thought that most people that would be interested in the Alta would not bother with mucking around with all of that stuff, especially if they were doing recording sessions or gigs where they needed to flip channels and different modes and things, where then all of a sudden the variac and a preamp in the front don't work for those other things.
Yeah.
So that made sense. It was like, let's see. And for me personally, it was super fascinating to see how close to Ed's sound we could get, using a modern amp with none of the other things that Ed did around it, super fascinating.
Yeah, it was cool. It was fun. I mean, this is just, it was awesome to be able to kind of we spent a bit of time on this one, I think, trying to get really trying to tone match it. So it was cool. The other thing that happened, guys, that I should mention is, so Simon was obviously kind of, getting ready to play Mean Street, and we were focusing in on the lead break and some of the rhythm parts and stuff like that. And I said to you, oh, how about the intro? The tapping part at the intro, and you were like, oh yeah, I haven't really worked on that.
No,
nope, I was like, man, give it a go. So what you see on the thing was you basically just kind of did it. I don't know, man. It was pretty awesome to see you to pull it together out of thin air. It's pretty spot on.
Yeah, that very, very start bit, for anyone that's ever attempted to play that, is super.
The very, very first bit, yeah.
The way that he flicks his right hand wrist back and forward is pretty counterintuitive to me. And as much as I know that with all the Van Halen stuff I've done, I should probably have worked on that more. But it's just, I've never had to play it live, so I've never really worked on it. But so we threw the intro together, and then we tacked that on. But the rest of it, I just pretty much played along with the track
all the way
with the bass and drums.
Yeah, no, it was cool. That was awesome. And I guess my last question, man, before we could probably wrap this up, is why Mean Street? Again, of all the VH stuff, right? And there's look, that would be a really hard one to settle on because there's just so much you could have done and so much that is awesome. Why Main Street?
I mean, when you think of, okay, so if we're going to do an Eddie Van Halen thing for the Alta 100 video, what song will we do? How do you pick? Like, do you do something off the first record? Van Halen 2? Do you do something off Fair Warning? Do you do something?
Did you throw a dart at the dartboard, or like, you know, like?
No, I didn't.
You could have done anything from like Fire through to, you know, I don't know, Hang 'Em High, or you could do anything, like, you know, like.
I think honestly, I just thought. I think it was just an instinct. I didn't really like have a spreadsheet and a dartboard and was throwing darts and see which one it landed on. Although that would be funny for next time. But yeah. I think, you know, I mean, pretty much unanimously, everyone loves the Fair Warning record. And as hard as it is to play that intro, just like Ed, everyone loves that little intro. But that groove, there's something funky about it. You know, the way Alex plays that groove is so funky. And I just thought something that's fun and funky as opposed to like dark and dirty would be a cool Eddie thing to play. Plus, that solo in Mean Street is killer with all those thumb harmonics, and it's kind of wild and off the wall, as Ed would say about it. I don't know. It was one of the first things that popped in my head, and I ran it by you, and you said, "Yeah, Main Street's cool."
Oh yeah, man. I would have said yes to anything you said, but yeah, that's one of my favorites for sure, man. That is just like.
Well, just out of curiosity, and while we're just talking in front of people, anyway, if we were to do another Van Halen thing, what would be the first thing that comes to your mind? What would you want us to do?
Oh man, I'd probably, if we did it again, and I'm sure we will, I'd probably go for something off Van Halen 2.
Yeah. So you know what I was thinking would be cool to do? How about we do this with the Alta? Instead of having it as be part of a thing, if I can find the Alex's drums and Michael's bass to even the opening track, You're No Good.
Oh yeah.
And just record the Alta, and I will try and play it as authentically every note along with them. We'll just take off, you know, Roth's vocal. What about something like that? It's just its own standalone video, just You're No Good with the Alta. I mean, because people always sort of cane Van Halen for the covers that they did, but to me, I don't give a stuff that it's a Linda Ronstadt song. I think that's one of the greatest openings of any of their records.
I couldn't agree more, man. And they do such a great version of that song. I mean, it's a great song.
It's a great song, but if you go back and listen to Linda Ronstadt's, Van Halen's eats it for breakfast. You know? Yeah. I think it's great, but that solo, you know, with that wow, take a banana, and then all the harmonics.
Oh man, it's just so good.
But it's got air and space in it. My favorite Van Halen stuff, and I think it's why people love Van Halen 2 so much, there's space in it.
Yep.
It's not just this wall of sound, like a, you know, with all due respect, like a Mutt Lange kind of production. There's all this room everywhere, all the time. And that's why I love that record. But yeah, we should do that. We should do a dedicated Alta 100 video, and on one track off Van Halen 2, the whole song.
I'm excited about that already.
Yeah, me too. All right, what are you doing later? Fantastic.
Man, we shouldn't wait long. Let's not wait long.
No, we shouldn't. Let's do it, brother. I'll get busy and I'll learn all the bits, and I think that'll be super fun.
Awesome, man. Let's do it. All right, man.
Well, man. Well, I think while we're sorry to interrupt. While we're talking about that, can everyone leave in the comments for an Alta 100 Part 2? What guitarist / you know, what song from that guitarist? So, speaking of Slash, why not? Why don't we could do a Slash thing? We could do a Mark Knopfler thing. We could do an Edge from U2 thing. We could we could do Slipknot. We could do Mr. Big. It doesn't matter what. We could do John Mayer. We could do Joe Bonamassa. Everyone put in the comments what you most want us to do, and we can just prioritize those ones for a Part 2. How about that?
That sounds killer.
Yeah, why not? I'll happily take direction on. I mean, I've got a lot of ideas of what I would like to do for a part 2, but there's going to be some stuff that you guys think of that I wouldn't, and I'd be very curious, actually. Vernon Reid.
Mike.
All right, there you go.
Hey, Mike, how you doing,
Okay.
man? Vernon Reid. Yeah. Hey, man.
We can
Michael,
do that.
you probably know that Living Colour are on tour with Extreme in Australia right now, and I went and saw them on Monday night here in Melbourne, and Simon and I are going together again.
We are. It's going to be wonderful.
This Sunday, right?
Sunday.
So we're going to go see them twice, and so Living Colour opened for Extreme, and I got to say, I mean, they were just awesome. They were awesome. I mean, they were all still incredible players. Vernon was just on fire. But the thing that struck me the most about Living Colour was Corey Glover's vocal range is still, it's all there. He hasn't lost any of it, man. That dude can sing any note. It's just incredible, right? So
that's awesome.
Most singers, as we know, right, and over time will tend to lose their the higher register or whatever. He doesn't seem to have lost any of it. But man, yeah, you could rip some old tracks off Vivid or something like that. That'd be pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up with Vivid and what was the other one around that era as well? The names escape me, the album, but
Time's Up.
Anyway, Time's Up. Love Time's Up. Yeah, Time's Up. Yeah, and hi, Michael Torren. Obviously, we've been chatting in the the live chats, but yeah, legend Michael Torren. But yeah, we'll do Vernon Reid. Why not? I think that's fantastic. This is what I want to know. I want to know what everyone wants to hear, and we will just pull up the alto with no pedals and see what we got.
It's interesting sound. So it's obviously Mark saying some nice stuff about your VH, which is I completely agree with. Vernon's look. Was he using a dual rectifier, guys, back then? I think he was.
I don't know. I actually don't know what Vernon was using. Michael would probably know, but
yeah. Pretty scooped kind of sound, like even his live tone on Monday night, it's pretty hollowed out in the mid-range, like compared to Nuno. Nuno came on and he was just all mids, and Vernon's sound was the opposite of Nuno's in that regard.
And it always has been pretty scooped. I mean, I would say to Vernon's sound, especially on those early records like Vivid and Time's Up, there's a lower mid thickness, but that upper mid stuff is definitely scooped out, and it's super gainy, obviously. So, I think your Channel 3 is going to get another workout for Vernon.
I think so. Yeah, super gainy. A rolling GP8. Wow, that's going back in the.
Is that? Hang on. Is the Black Squirrel saying that's what Vernon used for Vivid? Is that for real?
Yeah,
I mean that could be right. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
it's the right era for it for sure.
It's definitely the right era.
Again, Michael Torren, you're the rack guy.
Yeah, Michael would know.
We've got some other suggestions here, man. Street Lethal.
Okay. Craig, you're 100% on. In my Apple Notes, I already have a Racer X note, and I just think because we're going to have to see, Jason, just how extreme we can get that Channel 3 going, because what Paul used for those records was his Lee Jackson modded 50-watt Marshall, I think.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yep.
Super, super high gain. I mean, we're talking about like the Malmsteen sound and then some. Like it's most of that record, because it's all double-tracked guitars, all you hear is white noise behind everything, which is the hiss of the amps. It's just crazy. It's so much gain. But you're on, Craig. Street Lethal, it's in. I've already decided.
Brad's like, you'll slap me for this. CC, it must be CC DeVille, right? That Poison?
Yeah.
Solo, Life Goes On, or Randy's Life Tone. Yeah, cool. Thanks for doing this. Take care. Hey, man.
Yeah,
awesome,
Brad. Some Randy Rhoads could be cool. Definitely. You know, everyone rags on poor old CC DeVille, but there's a video on Anderton's just from yesterday or something where they were talking about BC Rich has relaunched all these guitars, and they were talking about all the famous players that use BC Rich. But for me, when I was a teenager, the most famous one was CC DeVille, because all those Poison clips, you know, where they would shoot, they'd have the camera guy running down the hallway backstage of like just hundreds of BC Rich guitars. I was like, man, don't leave out CC. That's not cool. You know?
I know. Yeah. I mean, he did a thing, right? I mean, the dude can play.
But it's like a lot of guitarists that never reached the top of, you know, Mount Rushmore, so to speak, as you know, in the pinnacle of the people we're talking about. But to me, if you've got your own sound, like you can hear CC DeVille playing and you know it's CC DeVille, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's one of the, to me, you get a medal just for that, because me as a session guitarist my whole life, if someone said to me, oh, I can hear instantly when it's you playing on a record, that's better than being able to play 1,000 notes a minute. You know, that's very hard when essentially you're dealing with the same woods, the same pickups and the same amps. To have your own sound, that's really, really tough, you know? So, I mean, okay, good example is Steve Lukather played the Rosanna stuff with a Les Paul and a Marshall. Slash played all their Appetite stuff with a Les Paul and a Marshall. Why do they not sound the same then?
Yeah.
You see? So that's tough. So anyone that can sound like you with the same 2 bits of gear, hats off. Definitely hats off.
Yeah. It's the truth. It's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I think that's in response to the Racer X stuff.
I will 100% do. How about this, Craig? What about just that opening, what do you call it? Cadenza kind of shred bit before the track of Street Lethal starts. How about that? I'll do that. And if anyone can find me one of those like hot pink Epiphone Paul Gilbert guitars from that era, I'll happily play it. He used some weird stuff for Racer X, very weird stuff.
Yeah, well, man, I don't know. The closest thing I've got to that is, because he obviously went to an Ibanez kind of RG style guitar. So I've got my old gem that you could rip on. That's
oh, that'll do. Yeah, and I got a Fender Hartfield that is sort of close to a gem. That would work. But my favorite look of Paul's from that era is those weird old looking 50s Epiphones that he sprayed hot pink and put a Kayla Tremolo on.
Yeah. I do know what you mean now.
When I think of Racer X, I think of that guitar. But yeah. Billy Gibbons. Oh, yes, please. Okay. So we got to do some ZZ, right?
Yeah, for sure, man. That's another, I was going to mention it at the time, but I thought we'd get too far off track, but it's another player whose use of open strings, you just don't realize.
Yeah.
You know, with his chord voicings and stuff. Yeah.
I'm going to put some of these in my phone like right away so I don't forget. So we got some ZZ. We got Street Lethal for Craig. Cool.
Yeah, definitely some ZZ Top, man. And so you got to just figure
out that's another one of those iconic, what I call the beginning of this era of amp sound is ZZ, right? ZZ, AC/DC, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It will do that for sure.
All right. That could
guys.
be a good one for you and me. That could be a good one for you and me to start the video with instead of AC/DC, the two of us playing a ZZ track. Great, right?
Something that Billy double tracked. Yeah. The 2 parts.
Yeah. It's one of those double tracked ones. Perfect.
We'll figure it out.
Good. Well, anyone else that's not watching live, leave it in the comments. And if we agree it'll be a good thing to do, we'll definitely do it.
Yeah. I think, well, if you've already got a list of 30, then we're probably going to end up with 50. So,
well, we're not going to get through the rest on a part 2. So I just think we make it an ongoing thing where we do another 10 for part 2 and then another 10 for part 3. And we just keep going until we run out, you know?
Yeah. Man,
and then we make, And then we make one video, the one ring to rule them all, so to speak, where we put them all in one 45-minute video, and we go, this is 50 sounds that the altar will do, you know.
Or you could do a like a vote off, right? Pick the top 10 from the, you know, from the 40 or whatever that have been done.
Oh yeah. That's right. You could do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how you pick a top 10 though.
I don't know either, man. Thanks, Plexidust, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Plexidust.
It's cool that I was super stoked with how it came out, and obviously I think the comments on the video have been really positive, right? So I really appreciate it, and I'm sure Simon does as well.
I really do. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks for everyone that's said some beautiful things. I think that this is one of the true experiences where the end result speaks kind of 50-50 for the two of us that are doing it together. I mean, you have put all this time and R&D and years of work into building this amp, and it sounds incredible. And I think that with the ideas that we both had for the types of songs and guitarists and different guitars and pickups that we used, it showcased what you've built really, really well. And so for whatever it's worth, I'm proud of it too. And it's an honor to play through your stuff, brother.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.
It was a really fun day, and I'm already looking forward to doing a part 2, because I know we'll have just as much fun.
I loved it. I mean, it was just like, it was fun to hang, and you know, and your studio setup is just killer. It's so great. And man, I've said this to a few people, right? To sit like literally just in front of you and watch you play. Oh man, it's pretty awesome. It's just awesome. Man, it was fucking awesome. So good.
The honor and the pleasure is mine. You've really, I think I said this in one of the comments to someone on the video, but you built a monster, and I just can't wait for everyone to hear it in the flesh, because if that's how good it sounds through the small capsule of a 57, then you wait till you guys hear it in front of a 4x12, because it just sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool experience for sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we will see you on the next video, and I'm sure we'll follow that up with a live stream as well, man. So keep the suggestions coming, and if you, as Simon said, right, throw some comments below the video, or if you're inclined, you can just send me a chat, message chat, or an email, or whatever, and we'll put together a list for part B, maybe part C. I like
it. Part B and part C, why not? And I think like involving what everyone most wants to hear makes heaps of sense, rather than it just being us thinking of what we think. That's fine, but I think like addressing what people want to hear themselves is perfect.
Killer.
Great.
All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks for staying up late. If anyone was sitting on this right through to the bitter end, we appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Just hang on the line.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, man.